A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
Star Wars, Death Star, by Michael Reaves and Steve Perry, 2007. Focusing on Death Star crew members, the novel spans 3 years concluding with the Battle of Yavin. Created and read by the Archivist Publishing.
Rodo shrugged. Don't know for sure, but a couple of things just happened that kind of hint at one. Several wings of TIE fighters suddenly decided to leave the station, more than 1,000 ships, and shortly thereafter you might recall that the lights dimmed for a couple of seconds. My guess is the power capacitors that fill up a big chunk of this big metal ball got diverted to that big honkin' gun. How come you know stuff like this? Nova said. How come you don't? I didn't say I didn't know it. Mima said, So is Rodo right? Now it was Nova's turn to shrug. He's not wrong. Word I got was that a rebel carrier ship popped out of hyper a couple of thousand clicks away and kicked out a load of X-Wings, presumably to come and shoot at us. According to my source, they turned the super laser at the carrier and blew it all the way back to Imperial Center. She blinked in astonishment. It's that powerful? Nova said, Oh, yeah. A ship is nothing. The power to the beam was only in the single digits. Cranked up full, anything within 500,000 clicks isn't safe, including asteroids, moons, even planets. No. Yes. Why else would they spend all that time and money on this? He swung one arm to encompass the entirety of their surroundings. If it couldn't produce some major damage, why else would they call it the Death Star? It's hard to imagine, she said. For you. For me, even. Not for the Imperial high-level mucks who get paid to come up with such things. What I heard, this thing's been in development in one form or another for years. And once it starts rampaging through the galaxy, the rebellion's crisp. If Tarkin even thinks there's a rebel base on a planet or a moon... Nova moved both hands in a motion, simulating the flowering of an explosion. Boom. End of base, end of problem. 2 or 3 worlds go up in a flash like that, and the war's over. Who would risk losing billions or even trillions of people to hide a few insurrectionists? It'll be all finished except for the bands and the medals. You think? Rodo asked. No question. Maybe when my tour is done, I'll open up a school somewhere quiet. Maybe out in one of the arms. Settle down, even have a few kids. Because war as we know it won't happen with things like this. He patted the bar top gently a couple of times, flying around. Build a few more of them. You won't need armies or navies or planet-bound military bases. You get a hotspot, some systems get cranky, you send a Death Star, and it'll be game over. Mima thought about it. The Sarge was right. Even with just one Death Star operational, the rebellion wouldn't stand a chance. Build a whole fleet of them, and the Empire would have the galaxy gripped in a Durasteel hand forever. She saw Nova wince. You okay, Sarge? She asked. Got a headache that won't quit. Maybe I can kill it with this embalming fluid you sell here. Next round's on me, he said. We can toast the end of the war. It's not over yet, Rodo said. Only a matter of time, Nova said. Command Center, Overbridge, Death Star. You're confident of this? Marty nodded. Yes, sir. The interior is not finished, but the hull is patent, and the hyperdrives will be ready shortly. Enough for a partial shakedown. Good. Since the rebels know our location, we cannot risk staying in the same system until we are at full readiness. Prudent. And the super laser? Engineering tells me that we can manage 30% power, and after a fast capacitor recharge for an hour or two, that much again. How strong will that beam be? Mati shrugged. Theoretical. Nobody knows for sure. Well, then we need to test it before we embark. That would be wise. Do you have a target in mind? Tarkin smiled. Yes, I do. Mati wanted to ask how Dela was faring, to show concern. But it didn't seem appropriate to bring it up just now. Besides, he already knew. She had suffered some kind of memory damage and was already on a fast ship back to the mall. Tarkin might be besotted with her, but he wasn't a total fool. He knew it would be unwise to risk Vader or the Emperor finding out she had been here against orders. Well, no matter. Even though the ship wasn't quite ready for full-scale battle maneuvers, Mati would have it running well enough in a matter of days. What target did the old man have in mind, though? There weren't any to choose from here. They'd pretty much scoured the system clean. There were two Bespin-class gas giants, one in an outer orbit, the other a sun skimmer, but they were too big to be practical. They needed a solar body at least big enough for its own gravity to crush it into spherical shape. Something that size would be the only way to calculate how powerful the beam would be at a third of its projected strength. Cube 24556, Resiplex 19, Sprawl 20, Death Star. Vil leaned back on the couch, next to Tila, feeling distracted. So, how was your shift? He asked. Pretty good. The crew's finished 2 sets of officers' quarters, another 500-person barracks, and a rec center. It's amazing to stand on an overlook and see these things just sort of appear in a matter of days. Sounds like you're pleased. Oh, I am. It's not the job I would have chosen, working on a battle station, but it's what I've been handed. And there is a sense of accomplishment in taking a standard design and tweaking it so it costs less and works more efficiently. That's great. Congratulations. What's wrong? He looked at her. How could she know? He hadn't been in all that many relationships, and the ones he'd been in had usually been short and shallow. Tila noticed things that none of the others had seemed to catch. Nothing. She grinned at him. You might be able to fly, Vil, but that won't. What's up? He shifted uncomfortably. I can't really talk about it. You mean the battle yesterday? How do you know about that? It's a big station, but people do talk to each other. Word gets around. He sighed. Yeah, I guess. Well, I was part of it. And? I made double ace. You know what that means? No. I shot down 10 enemy fighters. She sighed. I'm not a fan of war, but that's your job, isn't it? Wouldn't congratulations be in order? Yeah. But? Vil looked at her. Could he really talk about this with her? Yes, he decided. He could. There really was something different about her, something that said she would understand, even if she didn't necessarily approve. It wasn't as much fun as I always thought it would be. She looked at him with an unreadable expression. I wouldn't think that killing people would be. You can't think of them as people, just as the enemy. It's not that. It was too easy. She leaned back and blinked at him. Too easy? It was like shooting at targets. They were so intent on getting to the station they didn't offer much of a fight. We cut them to pieces. I don't get it. You wanted them to shoot at you? No. Well, yes. I mean, I wanted to survive, of course. I wanted to win. But I wanted it to be... I know it sounds stupid, but I wanted to have to work harder. Tila sighed. I understand. He looked at her in surprise. You do? Sure. Nobody wants to skate along the easy path all the time. You wanted a challenge, so you could feel like you'd accomplished something. Yeah, sometimes long odds are the only ones worth playing. Well, I can't say I'm sorry it wasn't more dangerous. Besides, I assume there'll be more battles? Vil shook his head. Maybe not. Knowing that Tarkin could just pull up and blow the whole world right out of the sky, I think wars are going to be a thing of the past pretty quick. Tila looked puzzled. And that's bad because, well, it's not. Not for civilization, of course not. Big picture and all that. But for fighter pilots, we're going to be put out to pasture. You could get a job flying commercial spacecraft. I had it in mind that if I survived, someday I would do that. But not yet. She put her arms around him and pulled him closer to her. You don't always get your first choice in life. Things happen, you have to adjust. Nobody knows that better than I do. He nodded. But if you wanted to be an ace, now you are one. That's something. Congratulations. Well, a double ace, if you want to get technical about it. Oh, yeah. Let's you and me get technical, eh? Vil laughed. There was definitely something different about this one. 54. The Hardheart Cantina, Deck 69, Death Star. Rachua had trouble jamming his way into the cantina. It was packed, and he understood why. A lot of celebrating was going on. The encounter with the rebel carrier was all over the station, and if the TIE pilots involved had been cocky before, they would be strutting a lot prouder after that victory. He wasn't political, and who won the war didn't matter much to him, except that being here meant they'd be moving away from the prison world and eventually back to civilization, and it would be the safest of safe rides. So all this was to the good. He saw Mima working frenetically behind the bar. Even with all the droids and servers on duty, he knew he wouldn't get much of a chance to visit with her this shift. Ah, well, he certainly didn't begrudge her the work. The crowd would thin eventually. Meanwhile, his latest scam was getting ripe. A few more days and he'd be rolling in credits. Well, maybe not, but certainly he'd have enough to cover the walls of his cube, with plenty left over to outfit the ceiling and deck. ISD Devastator, off planet Tatooine, Arcanus Sector, Wild Space. What is thy bidding, my master? Vader kneeled in front of the hollow projector, offering obeisance to the larger-than-life-sized image of the Dark Lord of the Sith. As always, his master's voice was as brittle as crystalline hydrogen. You have recovered the plans for the Death Star. Not yet, master. I know where they are, and I'll have them soon. I have every faith in you, Lord Vader. Vader inclined his head in a military bow. He felt a sense of pride. Praise from his master was infrequent and therefore to be relished. I have dissolved the Imperial Senate, Sidious continued. You will return to the battle station and convey this to Tarkin. He paused. I want Tarkin to know how important I think this is, that I would send you in person. Yes, my master. The station is nearly operational, and I would have it made completely so as soon as possible. I will see to it. And once you have gotten whatever information you can from Senator Organa, you will terminate her? Yes. Good, good. There are strange currents in the Force, Lord Vader, swirling about so that even I cannot see the future, save through a hazy pall. We must move with great care until things become clearer. Yes, master. The hollow blinked off, and Vader stood. His master's expression of confidence notwithstanding, the conversation had been disquieting. The Emperor was the most powerful Sith in 1,000 years, and he was always confident, always in control, able to manipulate complex situations as he saw fit with a celerity that was, to any uninitiated into the dark side of the Force, nothing less than astonishing. There were wheels within wheels, cogs, great and small, and Emperor Palpatine was the master machinist who ran all of them. And yet he had sounded concerned. What could possibly concern so powerful a personage? Vader's agents would recover the jettisoned escape pod from Tatooine. Meanwhile, he had been ordered to go to the Death Star, and that was where he would go. Super Laser Fire Control, Theta Sector, Death Star. The CO looked grim, and Ten understood why. He was feeling pretty grim himself.
He would do his job, that wasn't even in question. He was too much the career Navy man to do anything else. But he had to say something. "You're serious? Not really something I'd joke about, is it?" Ten felt like he'd just fallen down a puka hole into some bizarre fantasy world. "For practice? Just to see how well it'll work? Engineering hasn't gotten itself together from what they tell me. They say 33% power is all they can currently store in the capacitors for discharge. We need to see if that's true." "What'll it do?" "Nobody really knows. Nothing has been run up even close to that hot before." There was an awkward pause. Then the CO said, "You okay with this, Chief? Because I can get Beller or Reshius up here." Ten raised his hand. "I'm good, Cap. Not my job to decide where or when. It's to put the spike where they want it. Still, it's one thing to vaporize an enemy troop carrier or a rebel base, and quite another to destroy an entire world." "I hear you, Chief, but that's how it is." "Yeah." Ten straightened and squared his shoulders. "When?" "Test is set up for 1100 hours. Ten looked at the timer on the control wall. 2 hours. "No problem," he said. Command Center, Overbridge, Death Star. Monty wasn't really surprised when Tarkin told him of his decision, but he immediately saw the potential for problems. He voiced his concerns, circumspectly, of course. "I understand your apprehension," Tarkin said, "but I believe the political fallout will be minimal. Still, why risk even that? Because, as you well know, we cannot go into battle without knowing what our biggest weapon will do when we need to use it." Monty nodded. Tarkin was right. One always tested one's weapons. How and where, however, were different questions. "It's not your decision," Monty told himself, a fact for which he was profoundly grateful. Aloud, he said, "You're the Grand Moff." "Indeed I am." 55. The Hardheart Cantina, Deck 69, Death Star. The cantina was closed. The air purifying system was being cleaned and the ionizers balanced. It was noisy, but with the door closed to her office, the sound of the droid cleaners was muted enough so that Mima and Ratua could have a conversation. Ratua had the smug smile that she'd come to know over the last few months. "What have you done now, Green Eyes? You look entirely too pleased with yourself." "Merely supplied a basic human need," he said. "Right. Come on, tell Aunt Mima." "Nobody got hurt," he said, a bit too quickly. "Nobody will even miss a meal, trust me here. Everybody is happy. The quartermaster merely diverted a shipment of electronics and holoprojectors that would likely have sat in a storage bin for 10 years doing nothing because everything on this station is backed up at least twice already. The chances of them ever needing any of that gear are close to zero." Uh-huh. She wondered why she was even bothering to listen to him, justifying himself. Theft was theft, no matter the circumstances. But she knew why she listened. As long as he kept talking, she could gaze into those green eyes. "No, look, it's true. It's not doing anybody any good, and there is this market out there for entertainment. People are bored out of their heads in some sectors. And what are you going to show on these entertainment systems? You, liberated? Skin hollows? No, nothing like that." He sounded honestly affronted by the thought. "We're talking sports, crash ball, low-G gymnastics, pod racing, good, clean family programs." "And why can't people see those on the station's regular entertainment communications gear?" "Well, they can, but those terminals are set up where the designers want them. Think about the poor guy who's working in some dark warehouse out on the rim and gone away from any holo unit. Solder stacking boxes with a grav loader all day. Boring, mind-numbing work. No entertainment terminals there. What's wrong with him having a little viewer on his loader so that he can sneak a peek at his favorite team when he has a break? Or ram his loader into a wall because he's watching the proj instead of paying attention to where he's going?" He smiled at her. "Well, that's not my problem. I sell them a knife. They can use it to slice their veggie steak so they can stab themselves in the leg. None of my biz." She laughed. She couldn't help it.
Salat Ratuadil was a bad boy, true enough, but he was so disarmingly honest about his dishonesty. "Check it out," he said, obviously relieved at her laughter. He produced a device the size of his fist and set it on her desk, then activated it. The three-dimensional hologram of the station's entertainment net appeared over the projector. "Aside from the regular channels, this particular unit can tap into the external cam feeds. Watch." He touched the device, dialed up the magnification, and the image of a planet shimmered into view, about the size of a crash ball. "My old stomping grounds," he said. "Despair. A terrible place to visit, and in fact you couldn't anyway, because once you're there, you're there. But it looks nice from this far away." He cocked his head in consideration of the green and blue image. "No, actually, it still looks awful." Mima glanced at the cron inset into the proj. Almost 1100. The maintenance droids should be finishing the filters pretty soon, which was good because she wanted to be open again by mid-shift. And it would take at least another hour to... A flash of pale green glimmered briefly from the holo. The room shook, vibrating enough to rattle the chairs. She felt her viscera become momentarily buoyant, and realized that the ship's gravity field had flickered. "What is that?" Mima stood, fighting sudden, inexplicable panic. After all, what could possibly pose a danger to... Ratua held up a hand to quiet her. Those green eyes watched the proj. "Wait a second," he said. "Something's wrong." The image of the planet Despair seemed to shiver as a thin beam of emerald green. Nearly the same color as Ratua's eyes, she thought. From off the edge of the proj, lanced into the center of the single huge continent. They both watched disbelievingly as an orange spot blossomed on the image of the planet. It seemed no bigger than Mima's thumbnail at first, but it grew rapidly, spreading in an expanding circle. The center of the orange turned black. "Kark," Ratua said. He sounded stunned. "What? What is it?" They're firing at the planet with the super laser." The orange and black spread in irregular waves now, continuing outward from the center. The blue of the ocean didn't even slow it down. "The atmosphere's on fire," Ratua said, calmly as if he were discussing the weather. "Going to be a warm day today, temperature around 5,000 degrees. She felt a horrifying urge to laugh. It didn't seem real. It couldn't be real. Ratua must have tuned into some future-fic holo by mistake. It wasn't a real planet she was watching burn. No, things like that just didn't happen. Mima stared at the image. She could not look away. Super Laser Fire Control, Theta Sector, Death Star. Ten looked at the images from the targeting cam. He still had his hand on the firing lever. He released it and stared, watching as the very air on the prison world caught fire in a runaway planetary holocaust. Seismographic sensors showed that massive ground quakes had begun, rumbling down into the bowels of the planet. Giant waves in the ocean, generated by the shifting of tectonic plates, rushed for the shores of the big continent. Volcanoes spewed lava. Clouds of steam and volcanic ash began to rapidly obscure the surface from view. But not fast enough. He had just killed everything on the planet Despair. If all life wasn't dead already, it would be soon. The CO moved to look over his shoulder. He didn't congratulate Ten on the shot. He just stood there. "Stang," Ten said. The CO nodded. "Yeah." Command Center, Overbridge, Death Star. Motti said, "Engineering says the capacitors will be recharged in an hour and 13 minutes. Tarkin watched the projection as the effects of the beam manifested on the planet. By the time the second pulse was ready for discharge, there wouldn't be anything alive on the world below them to care. The chain reaction was massive, and at only 1/3 of the power that would be available when it was fully operational. Amazing. "I hope you're right about this," Motti said. "Politically, I mean. Of course I am, Admiral.
The population of that world consisted of condemned criminals sentenced to life imprisonment. They were never going back to civilization. It was a constant drain on imperial resources to transport them and to maintain them. Those troops will now be freed up for service. Nobody will mourn the murderers or the filthy planet on which they lived. And where will the Empire send its major criminals now? Tarkin turned away from the images of carnage and looked directly at Mati. Unless I am seriously mistaken, the death penalty will be used more frequently. Imperial justice is about to become swift and sure, Admiral. He turned back to watch the image of the dying world. G-12 Barracks, Sector N7, Death Star. Nova woke up screaming, beset with horror. The other sergeants watched him, but none of them approached. Bad idea to get too close to a martial arts expert coming out of a nightmare. Nova tried to calm himself, to slow his breathing, but he had never felt anything like this before. It was as if he had heard 1,000,000 people cry out all at once as they were killed. He stepped from his cot, went to the refresher, and washed his face. He needed to see that doctor again. He was beyond caring what anyone thought. Something was definitely wrong with him, and he couldn't live like this. 56. Super Laser Fire Control, Theta Sector, Death Star. An hour and 15 minutes after the first beam, 10 fired the second one. The planet Despair, already scorched, lifeless, and beset with cataclysmic groundquakes and volcanism, began to shake like some tormented creature in its death throes. Massive cracks, thousands of kilometers long and tens of clicks wide, striated the world. Mountains collapsed in one hemisphere as they jutted up and rose in another. It was impossible to see all this directly, of course, because of the cloud cover that had blanketed the surface, but the IR and VSI scopes showed everything all too clearly. The molten core of the globe, already venting through innumerable new volcanoes, oozed to the surface and produced oceans of lava that spread across the land. This was how the planet had been born, and this was how it was dying. An hour and 19 minutes later, when 10 fired the third beam that blew the charred and burned-out cinder apart, shattering it into billions of pieces, it seemed almost pointless. Everybody and everything on it had already been roasted, scalded, or drowned. The system's gravity twisted as the planetary well ceased to exist. Shield sensors quietly recorded the thousands of fragments, from the size of pebbles to that of mountains, deflected from the station. Sweet Queen Quinella. A whole planet destroyed. Just like that. No matter how tough you thought you were, that was hard to stomach. Especially when you were the one who had pulled the lever. ISD Devastator, approaching Death Star. Vader had felt the fabric of the Force tear, even in hyperspace. Some vast and terrible event had taken place. When they dropped below light speed, it had taken but a few seconds for his sensor crew to determine the cause of that event. The prison planet of Despair was no more. Vader nodded to himself as he looked at the magnified view of planetary debris. That should convince the military that they had developed the ultimate weapon. They were wrong, but they would believe it. They would be full of their pitiful dreams of power and glory, unable to comprehend the truth, certain that they were unbeatable. That was not his worry. He had his orders, and he would carry them out. He would get the information he sought from the dissident princess. They would find the rebels' main base and destroy it. The war would be over, and Vader would finally be free to resume his studies of the dark side in earnest. He had much to learn, and, with the Emperor no longer preoccupied with this petty conflict, he would resume his training. That was what was important. That way lay real power. Main conference room, command center, Death Star. Mati wanted to reach over and smash in General Taggi's face. The man was insufferable. Taggi said, "Until this battle station is fully operational, we are vulnerable. The Rebel Alliance is too well equipped. They are more dangerous than you realize." Mati could have pointed out that the vaunted Rebel Alliance had sent a huge carrier against the station, and that unfortunate vessel had been blown out of existence by a single low-powered pulse of the not yet fully operational Death Star's main battery, from more than 2,000 kilometers away, which was nothing compared with the fact that an entire planet had just been destroyed with 3 partial-strength pulses, any one of which could blow an armada out of the galaxy. But Taggy already knew this, of course. He was putting his objections into the record, covering his bets in his backside, just in case. 2 could play that game. Motti said, "Dangerous to your Starfleet, Commander, not to this battle station." Taggy was as thick-headed as a Durasteel plate. He just kept prattling on. "The rebellion will continue to gain support in the Imperial Senate as long as—" He stopped as Grand Moff Tarkin, followed closely by Darth Vader, strode into the conference room. As he entered, Tarkin cut in. "The Imperial Senate will no longer be of any concern to us. I've just received word that the Emperor has dissolved the Council permanently. The last remnants of the old Republic have been swept away." Even that didn't shut Taggy up. "It's impossible. How would the Emperor maintain control without the bureaucracy?" Tarkin said, "The regional governors now have direct control over their territories." He smiled, ever so slightly. "Fear will keep local systems in line. Fear of this battle station." "And what of the rebellion?" Taggy kept on. The man was like a Borat with a bone. He wouldn't let it go. "If the rebels have obtained a complete technical readout of this station, it is possible, however unlikely, that they might find a weakness and exploit it." "The plans you refer to will soon be back in our hands." That from the deep-voiced Vader, who stood behind the now seated Tarkin. Motti couldn't contain himself any longer. "Any attack made by the rebels against this station would be a useless gesture, no matter what technical data they've obtained. This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it." Vader said, "Don't be too proud of this technological terror you've constructed. The ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force." Motti wanted to laugh. Vader had to be insane. How could he say that, especially with the rubble of despair still sweeping past the station? "Don't try to frighten us with your sorcerer's ways, Lord Vader," he said, feeling safe in the presence of witnesses. He was aware that Vader was moving toward him, but Motti was committed. Even knowing what a bad idea it was to bait the man in black, he continued. "Your sad devotion to that ancient religion has not helped you conjure up the stolen data tapes, or given you clairvoyance enough to find the rebels' hidden fort." 3 meters away, Vader leaned forward and made a small motion with his hand, closing it into a fist. Motti felt his throat clench and close up as if it were being crushed by a steel clamp. He couldn't breathe. He dug his fingers into his collar, trying to remove what felt like an unbreakable band around his neck. It didn't work. The pressure was there, but there was nothing material around his throat to cause it. "I find your lack of faith disturbing," Vader said. Motti felt himself start to gray out. He wanted to scream, but he could not utter so much as a squeak as he slid toward the abyss of unconsciousness and death. He barely heard Tarkin speak. "Enough of this. Vader, release him." "As you wish," Vader said. He turned and strode away, and a moment later Motti fell forward onto the conference table, not feeling the impact. He could breathe again, however. The constriction was gone. He sat up, filled with rage, and glared at Vader. If only he had a blaster. But though he was not a cowardly man, his rage was tinged with fear. How had Vader done that? He had been 3 meters away. Motti swallowed, his mouth dry, his throat sore. Tarkin said, "This bickering is pointless. Lord Vader will provide us with the location of the rebel fortress by the time this station is operational. We will then crush the rebellion with one swift stroke." Motti believed that. But he also knew something else now, too. Vader had power, and it was real. Motti had felt it, and if Tarkin had not intervened, he believed with every fiber of his being that he would be dead. That was a sobering thought. What did it matter if you commanded a station that could destroy a world, if you could be killed yourself by a freak waving a hand in the air? Something would have to be done about Vader. But very, very carefully done. 57. Prison Block AA, Detention Center, Death Star. Yulee had just completed his rounds, which included a quick tour of a different prison block every cycle. Most of the prisoners were there for minor infractions, drunk and disorderlies and the like. He was in the corridor heading to his office when he saw none other than Darth Vader coming from the other direction. With him was a beautiful young woman. It was such a surreal sight that he was momentarily tempted to question his senses, but it was real enough. He could see the fluorescence, distorted reflections slide along the black helmet as Vader walked, and could hear the regulated breathing of the man's respiratory apparatus. The sound of his boots against the floor grating was oddly soft for so large a man. Vader had one hand clamped on the woman's upper arm, and even from 10 meters away, Yulee could see by her expression of pain and anger that the grip was hard enough to be hurting her. Whoever she was obviously not with Vader by choice. The woman wore a white gown, and she looked somehow familiar, though he couldn't place her. Her dark brown hair was long, but rolled into tight circles against the sides of her head. Even through the discomfort and indignity of her situation, she seemed extraordinarily self-possessed. The three of them were alone in the prison block corridor. As Yulee drew near, Vader stopped. Paying no attention to the doctor, he opened one of the cells and pushed the woman unceremoniously inside. The hatch dropped shut behind her. Yulee had slowed and glanced back over his shoulder to watch as he passed. After incarcerating the woman, Vader turned, ebony cape flaring behind him. He looked back at Yulee. Although no part of his face was visible, Yulee somehow had no doubt that Vader was looking directly at him. He set his gaze in front of him once more and continued walking. Just as he exited the block, 3 black-clad and helmeted technicians passed him. Behind them, floating on a cushion of repulsor lift energy, an interrogator droid followed. Yulee took the lift back to medical, wondering who the woman was and what her crime had been. The lift doors opened and he started up the corridor, but stopped as C. Formio wheeled around the corner. "Good after midday, Dr. Davini." "Not for everyone, it appears. I just saw Darth Vader, of all people, apparently intending to interrogate a young woman in the prison block. Do you know who she is?" "Princess Leia Organa, a member of the Imperial Senate from Alderaan. It is said that she is also a sympathizer with the Rebel Alliance. Apparently she has information the Empire wants, and thus her impending interrogation by Lord Vader." Yulee winced at the thought. Interrogation technology was imprecise, more brute force than finesse, intentionally so for the most part. Many prisoners started talking a click a minute at the first sight of one of those glossy black ISB globes, bristling with archaic hypodermic syringes and electrodes. And woe to them if they didn't, because the term interrogator droid was just a euphemism for its real function. It was a torture device, purely and simply. Many who underwent examination by the probes were mentally or even physically damaged beyond repair. A harsh fate for such a lovely and brave young woman as this princess apparently was. He had seen only a hint of fear in her as she passed. That she was willing to resist Vader to the extent of requiring such extreme measures indicated a fortitude Yulee doubted that he himself possessed. He was outraged by the thought of such barbarism being practiced by the Empire, although not particularly surprised. But he knew there was nothing to be done about it. To protest the actions of the Emperor's whip would do her absolutely no good, and no doubt result in his own immediate imprisonment. He could finally get his discharge from the medical wing of the Imperial Navy, although it would likely be a discharge from this plane of existence as well. He shook his head and looked at Formio. "Were you looking for me?" "Indeed. Dr. Hotes wishes to discuss the overages in last month's supply budget with you." Yulee nearly groaned aloud, but the thought of the young woman in the cell made him feel somewhat ashamed of himself. She was facing far more than a bureaucratic upbraiding about expenditures. He followed the droid around the corner. What a shame. She was so young, so lovely. She reminded him somehow of Barris. Cell 2187, Block AA, detention level, Death Star. Vader, accompanied by 3 black-clad and helmeted technicians, entered the cell where Leia Organa was being held. He had hoped that she would have become more tractable after her capture, but she had remained silent. Her choice. She would regret it. Behind him, the interrogator droid followed. It was a crude tool, a blunt instrument compared with the subtlety and precision possible with the Force. However, Princess Leia's mind was too strong to easily manipulate, even with the power of the dark side at his beck and call. It was possible that he could wrest the knowledge from her, but he might end up destroying the very information he sought. She would force him to burn her brain to a husk before she would willingly part with the data. Of that he had no doubt. However, after being subjected to the tender mercies of the device floating behind him for a time, her mind should be a bit more pliable. Now and then one had to make do with the tools available, however crude they might be. The chamber's door slid up, revealing the princess sitting on a platform in the mostly bare room. Vader and 2 of the techs entered. The 3rd waited outside in the corridor.
"And now, Your Highness, we will discuss the location of your hidden rebel base,"
Vader told her. As the interrogator droid floated in behind him, Vader saw her defiant expression falter. He felt her fear as the machine approached her. Good. He heard the door slam down behind them. But after half an hour, despite the truth drugs, electrical shocks, and other inducements he had administered, it was evident that her resistance had not been lowered enough for him to probe her mind. That was surprising. She was physically weakened and in considerable pain, but her mind remained shielded. She had revealed nothing. Most unusual for anyone except a Jedi to have such control, he mused. He kept his anger and frustration under tight rein, letting none of it show. He had other matters that required his attention. For now.
"We are not done here,"
he told her. To one of the technicians, he said,
"Have a medic attend to her."
The technician said, "But isn't she sentenced to die?"
"When I decide it is time,"
Vader said.
"If she is not alive and well until that moment, I will hold you personally responsible."
The tech grew visibly paler. Vader swept by him and out of the chamber. Med Center, Death Star. Yuli couldn't stop thinking about the imprisoned princess. Something about her touched him, somehow. As he left Hotiz's office, he told himself that there was no point in thinking about her. Most likely she was already dead by now. Another casualty of war. Like the millions of people destroyed along with the prison planet. "You there," a man's voice called loudly. Yuli turned and saw an interrogation tech standing down the hall. "Are you the medic on duty?" "I'm Dr. Davini, yes. I have a patient for you. This way, quickly." Yuli followed the tech back up to the prison level. Vader was gone, along with the interrogation droid, but their work was evident. The princess lay on the cell's platform in no small amount of distress. Yuli passed his hand over the cell's reader and said, "EM kit." The reader recognized his ID. A slot in the wall opened and a drawer containing a full emergency medical kit extruded. He grabbed a handheld diagnoster from it and moved to the supine woman. He pressed the sensor against her bare shoulder and watched as the readout's info crawl began. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened. She gave him a faint smile. "Pardon me if I don't get up, Doctor. I'm feeling a bit tired." He gave her an automatic smile back. "Sorry," he said. "I'll do what I can to help you." "First time I've heard that in a while. Just relax and I'll take care of things." "I've heard that one before, too." Despite the gravity of the situation, Yuli grinned. He had to admire the woman, pumped full of chem and suffering from electrical shocks and who knew what else. And she was still able to joke. If she was an example of the rebels' mettle, the Empire wasn't going to win this war anytime soon. The Hardheart Cantina, Death Star. Generally, the atmosphere in the place was, at the least, festive. Today, however, the mood was subdued. Ratchua sat at the bar watching Mima make drinks, and neither of them was happy. She went through the motions, but he knew her mind was not on her task. They had recently witnessed the death of a planet, an act committed by the huge weapon upon which they lived. Whatever one's politics, it had been a sobering, nightmarish sight. What kind of monster could order such an atrocity, could cause the destruction of an entire world? A world that, had Rachua not managed to escape, would have taken him with it, along with the millions of other lives cut short in panic and agony. They weren't the only ones who had seen it, and for something of this magnitude, word spread quickly. It was true that the Death Star had been built with the capability to commit such heinous acts, but he'd been given to understand, along with most of the station's population, that it was never actually going to have to use such destructive power. What had the man in charge, Tarkin, he remembered, said on one of the public comcasts? Fear would keep the systems in line. Rachua could understand that. It made a skewed kind of sense. But to actually use the station's ability, to annihilate an inhabited world, even one populated by the hardest hard cases in the galaxy, not even as a demonstration, but purely to test, that was something no sane man could grasp. The war had just taken a very ugly turn, and Rachua feared it might get worse before it got better. Commander Atur Wrighton, who was not given to much in the way of socializing, sat alone at a table drinking a potent liquor distilled from some kind of tropical tuber on Ithor. It had quite a kick, and while he usually enjoyed the fiery taste, that wasn't the reason he was drinking it now. How it had come to pass that the Empire was destroying entire worlds. Atur was an intelligent and sensible man. He might be apolitical, but he wasn't naive. He was aware of the purpose for which this battle station had been built. The Death Star was a doomsday device, a weapon of such unimaginable horror that its very existence would, supposedly, prevent any insurrection anywhere. Even the concept of war would become a thing of the past. And even if such ultimate power had to be demonstrated, there were plenty of uninhabited worlds floating out there. Blow one of them to flinders, and the message is delivered loud and clear. Your world could be next. He had been naive, he realized. He'd let himself believe that there was a limit to inhumanity, that there could be such a thing as a weapon too powerful to use. But such was obviously not the case. There were, it appeared, no depths to which sentient beings could not sink. Build a blaster that could destroy a planet, and some bigger fool would build one that could extinguish a star. It would go on, insanity without end, because there's always a bigger blaster. How could a being with any conscience remain politically neutral after such an event? He took another swig from his glass. It was certainly enough to drive any sane being to drink. Tila and Vil sat at a table, drinks before them, but neither bothered to pick up their glasses. They didn't speak. She watched Vil stare moodily into his glass. He was a pilot. He was trained for war. He risked his life in fights. But even so, the destruction of despair had shaken him. Badly. Tila was beyond shaken. She was appalled. Horrified. She could have been on that world. She had been on that world, and if not for an ability the Empire had decided it needed, she would have still been down there when despair was shattered. She'd had nothing to do with the weapons aspect of building the station. She designed and built housing and recreation and living space, and she'd had no real choice, had she? After all, she was still a prisoner. Right? Her inner self could have a fine old time saying, "I told you so," along about now, she knew. Instead, it was uncharacteristically silent. 58. The Hardheart Cantina, Deck 69, Death Star. Yuli sat at the bar, next to a humanoid with unbelievably bright green eyes, and thought about cantinas he had frequented during his time in the military. Some had been fun, some merely places to get lit. Some had been dens of comrades in thrall, doctors, nurses, techs, all dragooned and forced to serve in a war that they all detested. The beings who had to patch up the wounded or cover the dead they couldn't save were generally less enthusiastic over the glory of war than most. After 1,000 young people pass under your knife, torn and battered by the effects of blasters or shrapnel, it got old, and it made you weary to your depths. War was as stupid and anti-survivalist an action as a species could undertake. And if Yulee could suddenly be made some kind of god, as his first act, he would erase the knowledge and memory and ability to make war from the universe. Now the Empire had a planet buster, and here he was on the blasted thing. How much worse could things get? "Hey, Doc." Yulee looked to his left and saw a sergeant arrive at the bar. It took a couple of seconds to place the man. He was a patient. The guy with the bad dreams and the midi-chlorians. "Sergeant Steele. How are you sleeping?" "Truth is, hardly at all. Recently got worse. A lot worse." He sat on the stool. "I understand. Pills didn't help?" "Not really." "Sorry." "Me too. I..." He stopped and looked past Yulee at the green-eyed fellow on Yulee's right. Salat Ratchua Dill. Has to be a Zolotian with those eyes, Yulee thought. One of the rare chlorophyllians in the galaxy. And he and the Sarge obviously knew each other. The plant man turned and stared, and Yulee saw panic well briefly in those eyes. But then they resumed their slightly cynical outlook. "Well, blast," he said. "You changed your shift, didn't you, Steele? I should have checked." He shook his head, shrugged, and grinned. "Oh, well." "What are you doing here?" the sergeant asked. No sound of hostility that Yulee could tell. Nevertheless, he was starting to feel acutely uncomfortable sitting between them. "Having a drink," Salat Ratchua said. "Wishing I were back on my home world. Things weren't so bad there in retrospect. I could have had a pretty good life at home. But no, I wanted to travel and see the galaxy. Stupid choice." The tender drifted over, and Yulee noticed that her right hand was under the bar out of sight. He was feeling very uncomfortable now. The tender, a Twi'lek, looked familiar too. Where had he seen her? Ah, yes. Just picture her naked. Another patient. "Dr. Davini, nice to see you again." She looked at the fellow to Yulee's right. "Everything okay here?" The green-eyed man said, "Oh, yeah, just renewing an old acquaintance. Been a while." Steele looked at the tender. "Mima, you know this guy?" She nodded. "I do." Steele looked at the Zolotian again. Yulee felt a current of something uneasy passing back and forth, and he leaned back a bit to get out of the flow. Steele said, "How did..." "I decided to leave," Salat Ratchua said. Steele didn't say anything for a moment. Then he looked at the Twi'lek woman behind the bar. "You wouldn't have your hand on a stunner under there, would you, Mima?" "I might." Steele nodded, as if to himself. He looked at the Zolotian, then back at the Twi'lek. His eyebrows arched. "So that's how it is?" "That's how it is. And I do know who he is and where he came from." There was a pregnant silence. Yulee said, "Pardon me for butting into what's probably not my business, but since I'm sitting in the middle of this conversation and we're all of a sudden talking about stunners, somebody want to tell me what's going on?" The other three looked at one another. The Zolotian said, "Sorry, Dr. Davini, is it? It's fairly straightforward. Before he was transferred here, Sergeant Steele was a guard on Despair. You know that planet this station just blew to space dust? And I was, for a time, a resident there." "He's an escaped prisoner," Steele said. His voice was still quiet and calm, but it carried clearly to them. He looked at his hands, which were, Yulee noticed, quite calloused. He looked back at the Zolotian. "You were sentenced there for life. You mean death, don't you, Sarge? Because when the powers that be on this station let go with that death ray, anybody who was on Despair got cooked to ashes, and those ashes got blown all over the galaxy, if I recall recent history." Steele nodded. "Yeah." "So now what?" the Twi'lek asked. Yeah, Salat Ratuadil added. You can't exactly send me back, can you, Sarge? Yuli watched Steele's face. He would probably be a good card player because he wasn't giving anything away. No, he finally said. I guess I can't. He looked at Mima. You really think he's worth pulling that stunner for? I really do. Another 5 seconds passed. Then, how about a mug of a la Riviere, Steele said. And give the Doc and Radish boy here another of whatever they're drinking. On me. Mima nodded and removed her hand from under the bar. She and her boyfriend seemed a bit relieved. Not that much, but then Yuli would wager his eventual possible slow discharge that nobody was spiking any sine waves tonight. Shock tended to have that effect on people. He was aware that a potentially nasty situation had just been avoided, and it might be wise to let it lie, but he was curious. He said, As I recall, Sergeant, aren't you some kind of martial artist? I am. If the lady had pulled the stunner, couldn't you have defended yourself against it? Probably. But she wasn't the problem. Oh? Want to show him? He said, looking over Yuli's shoulder at the Zolosian. Sure. Where's your glass, Doc? Yuli turned away from the sergeant and looked at the bar. His half-drunk glass of beer was... Where was it? He looked up at the Zolosian. There was a blur of motion. His glass was back in front of him. The beer sloshed a bit, but otherwise gave no indication that it hadn't been in front of him the whole time. Steele laughed softly. Ratch was fast. I get that, Yuli said. So if Mima had pulled her stunner while you were dealing with her, Ratchua could have clonked you one. If you'd gone after him first, she'd have stunned you. Not a high-percentage situation for me, Steele said. Yuli blinked at him. So just like that, you're okay with this? You're going to let it go? Steele nodded as Mima drew a mugful of dark ale for him. Why not? Not like he's going anywhere. And he's right, I can't send him back to a place that doesn't exist anymore. He took the ale, smiled, and sipped at it. Ah, thanks. He looked back at Yuli again. And compared with what the Empire just did, how much harm could a smuggler do? You want to turn him in? Not particularly. Well, there you are, then. The other drinks arrived, and the tender had poured one for herself. Yuli held up his glass. To the end of the war, he said. The others raised their glasses and echoed his words. 59. Command Center, Overbridge, Death Star. Tarkin looked at Vader, the unspoken question in his eyes. General Taggy stood there as well, still recovering, no doubt, from Tarkin's earlier revelations. Vader said, Her resistance to the mind probe is considerable. It will be some time before we can extract any information from her. Tarkin shook his head. Why was it always the small details that seemed to trip up the largest projects? One of his staff officers arrived. Tarkin regarded him. The man said, The final checkout is completed. All systems are operational. What course shall we take? Excellent. If the super laser was now fully functional, they could go anywhere. But they needed the location of that base, and... Ah. Wait. Tarkin rubbed at his chin. Perhaps she would respond to an alternative form of persuasion. What do you mean? Vader said. I think it's time we demonstrated the full power of this station. He looked back at his officer. Set your course for Alderaan. The man mumbled something and left, but Tarkin was already thinking ahead. If Princess Leia Organa was a thorn in the Emperor's side, then Alderaan was a forest of thorns. Well, it was time to purge that forest with fire. Taggy started to say something, but apparently thought better of it. Tarkin smiled almost benignly and said, I understand your concerns, General. Rest assured I've spoken with Emperor Palpatine recently about demonstrating his battle station's range and strength. He has assured me that I have full reign to do so. He looked at Vader. You disapprove, Lord Vader?
Not at all, Governor. Cell 2187, detention level, Death Star. Yulie looked at the reads on his sensors. Princess Organa was doing as well as could be expected, given her unpleasant experience. If you didn't know what she had undergone, it would be hard to tell by looking at her. They were alone in the room. He had made the tech wait outside. Thank you, Doctor. Sorry, I didn't get your name. Davini, Cornell Davini. My friends call me Yulie. I appreciate your medical help, Dr. Davini, but I don't think we're going to be friends. I don't expect I'll be around much longer. And you are an Imperial officer, after all. He shrugged. Not by choice. I was drafted. And they aren't letting doctors muster out, as I am sure you're aware. You could have deserted. He laughed. Really? When? I haven't been anywhere I could have walked away from without being shot by both sides for my trouble. Besides, I'm not sure working for the rebels would be any better. She raised herself by one elbow off the examining couch. It took effort, he noted, but she did it, the better to look him in the eye. You support the Emperor's agenda. I have no clue what his agenda might be, and like I said, I'm not sure that the alliance would be any better. Yes, they talk a good show, but so did Palpatine before he declared himself Emperor. The Senate will continue to oppose him, she said. You haven't heard? The Emperor has dissolved the Senate. You were out of a job, Princess. She paled, and one of the sensors pinged quietly, registering the momentary orthostasis. Yulie put a hand on her shoulder and tried to push her gently back down, but she brushed his hand away. When did this happen? He shrugged. I don't know. I had a patient who works for someone who was in a high-level meeting. It was announced right after Vader arrived on the station with you. She shook her head. This is terrible news. All the news is terrible, Yulie said. It has been since this war began. She looked up at him. If there's ever going to be good news for any of us again, Yulie, it has to start with us. We have to create it, not wait to read about it the next morning. The door slid up. Yulie looked up in annoyance and said, I thought I told you to. He stopped. It wasn't the tech. It was Vader. He entered, his cloak spreading like black ink against the eggshell white of the exam room's floor. Doctor, I trust your patient as well. The words came out before Yulie was aware of them. Yes, no thanks to you. Leia laughed. Vader regarded him. You are insubordinate, Doctor, but I have no time to show you the error of your thoughts. He gestured to Leia. Come with me, Your Highness. For a moment, Yulie and the princess locked gazes. Her eyes were brown, he noticed. Barris's eyes had been blue, he remembered. If he'd had a weapon, he might have used it on Vader in that brief instant of time to allow her a chance to escape. But he was a doctor, not a fighter. It was not his path. Good luck, he said to her. She nodded. And to you. Vader ushered her through the door ahead of him with a gesture that was almost courtly. The panel dropped, and they were gone. Command Center, Death Star. Mati entered the control room to report to Tarkin. We've entered the Alderaan system. It had been a quick trip, and all systems had performed flawlessly. The station was as fast as any ship in the Imperial Navy, and faster than most. The jump to light speed had been smooth, the hyperspace lanes had been cleared by Imperial order, and it seemed that it had taken no time at all to reach the Alderaan system. The super laser was charged to full capacity and ready to fire. Tarkin nodded. He seemed about to speak when Vader entered, along with a couple of guards and the fetching Princess Leia Organa. Gorgeous woman, Mati thought. He wouldn't mind getting to know her better. Alas, she wasn't going to be with them much longer. A waste. She was hustled up to Tarkin. It seemed obvious that Vader's tortures had had little or no effect, because her spirit was unbroken. Governor Tarkin, she said, I should have expected to find you holding Vader's leash. I recognized your foul stench when I was brought on board. Mati suppressed a laugh. My, but she was a spitfire. A real shame she had to die.
Tarkin favored her with a smirk. Charming to the last. He reached out and touched her chin. You don't know how hard I found it, signing the order to terminate your life. She jerked her head back. I'm surprised you had the courage to take the responsibility yourself. Marty held a smile in check, but not without effort. She might be about to die, but she wasn't going to cringe in fear. You had to respect that in an enemy, even a woman. Maybe especially a woman. Princess Leia, before your execution, I would like you to be the guest at a ceremony that will make this battle station operational. Tarkin took a few steps, raised his hands to take in the vastness of the station, and turned to regard her again. No star system will dare oppose the Emperor now. She sneered at him. The more you tighten your grip, Tarkin, the more star systems will slip through your fingers. Tarkin walked back to her, pointing a finger for emphasis. Not after we demonstrate the power of this station. In a way, you have determined the choice of the planet that will be destroyed first. He loomed over her face to face. Since you are reluctant to provide us with the location of the rebel base, I have chosen to test this station's destructive power on your home planet of Alderaan. That wiped the smirk from her face. She said, No, Alderaan is peaceful. We have no weapons. You can't possibly. You would prefer another target? Tarkin asked. A military target? Then name the system. Marty watched as Tarkin crowded the princess, giving her no space, no chance to regain her balance, either figuratively or literally. He leaned over her nose to nose, backing her up. She was stopped by Vader standing behind her. I grow tired of asking this, Tarkin told her, so it'll be the last time. Where is the rebel base? Marty watched as she looked at the viewer. Alderaan was centered there, a beautiful green, white, and blue world, quite unaware of its impending danger. Dantooine, she said. Her voice was soft, defeated. They're on Dantooine. She lowered her gaze. Tarkin looked up, pleased. There, you see Lord Vader. She can be reasonable. He looked at Marty. Continue with the operation. You may fire when ready. Leia looked up in shock. What? Tarkin turned back to face her. You're far too trusting. Dantooine is too remote to make an effective demonstration, but don't worry. We will deal with your rebel friends soon enough. No, she struggled, but Vader held her fast. Marty smiled as he prepared to give the order. Tarkin was right. Fear was the key. Super Laser Fire Control, Death Star. Ten heard the order crackle over the speaker. He couldn't believe it, but there it was. Commence primary ignition. He hesitated a second. Could it be some bizarre kind of test, to see if he had what it took? No, that was foolish. He had already killed the prison planet, hadn't he? They couldn't have any doubts about his loyalty, both to the Empire and to Governor Tarkin. But in a way that made it worse, because it meant the order was real. He was about to destroy yet another world. And it wasn't a virulent jungle planet swarming with criminals this time. This time it was a world all too similar to his own homeworld. He was aware of his CO watching him. He reached up, grabbed the lever. All systems were green. His crew once again performed their functions flawlessly, adjusting switches, checking readouts, balancing harmonics. All too soon, everything was in readiness. All systems were go. Ten felt sweat dripping down his neck under that blasted helmet. He looked at the timer. 00:58:57. He pulled the lever. It would take a second or so for the tributary beams to coalesce. He wanted to look away from the monitor, but he couldn't. The super laser beam lanced from the focusing point above the dish. The image of Alderaan on the screen was struck by the green ray. It took no more than an instant. Ten knew that the beam's total destructive power was much bigger than matter-energy conversions limited to real space. At full charge, the hypermatter reactor provided a superluminal boost that caused much of the planet's mass to be shifted immediately into hyperspace. As a result, Alderaan exploded into a fiery ball of ice-smiting light almost instantaneously, and a planar ring of energy reflux, the shadow of a hyperspatial ripple, spread rapidly outward. The timer read 00:59:10. So little time, so much damage. It was incredible. If somehow the Rebel Alliance were to win this war, not that Tenkranit could see how that would be possible given what he had just witnessed, what he had just done, then surely this act would condemn his ashes to the deepest pit they could find after he was executed. It was his job, and if he hadn't performed it, someone else would have. But his belly roiled with the enormity of what pulling that lever had caused. Billions of lives snuffed out, just like that. There was no sense of triumph in it, none. He had not destroyed a rebel base or a military target. Instead, a planet full of unarmed civilians had been extinguished. And he had done it. It made him feel sick. G-12 Barracks, Sector N7, Death Star. Nova was taking a sonic shower to relax before trying once again to sleep, when he felt a roar in his head, soundless but nevertheless so loud that it knocked him completely unconscious. When he awoke, he was lying on the floor of the shower plate, the hum of the sonics still vibrating his body. His nose was bleeding, and his muscles tremored and shook, as if he'd been hit by a stunner on maximum. He could barely stand. Something had just happened. Something terrible. 60. Main conference room, command center, Death Star. The Imperial officer strode into the room, his boots echoing on the polished deck. Tarkin sat at the opposite end of the conference table, and Vader had taken a position near the wall to the left of the door. No one else was there save a pair of guards on the sides of the doorway. The officer came to attention. Tarkin looked at the man. Yes? Our scout ships have reached Dantooine. They found the remains of a rebel base, but they estimate that it has been deserted for some time. They are now conducting an extensive search of the surrounding system. Vader felt a small surge of triumph, even though the news was bad. He had expected this. As the officer turned and marched away, Tarkin came to his feet, simmering with rage. She lied. She lied to us. Vader was amused at Tarkin's outrage. Now who was too naive and trusting? Aloud, he said, I told you she would never consciously betray the rebellion. Tarkin took a few steps toward him. Vader could sense that the governor's anger had gotten the better of him. Terminate her, immediately. Unseen under his helmet, Vader's tight features formed a painful grin. He understood Tarkin's anger. After all, he himself was a master of anger. But Princess Leia Organa might better serve them alive. He would consider the matter. Tarkin could not order, only suggest various courses and actions to him, and he was not averse to going along with those suggestions most of the time, since they didn't really matter. But Darth Vader bowed to no one's wishes, save those of his master, the Dark Lord of the Sith. Should his master's wishes and Tarkin's collide, Tarkin would be swept away with the rest of history's dust without a second's hesitation. Nova hadn't really been surprised to be assigned as one of the guards for the conference room on the command level. It wasn't his normal duty, but he was a senior sergeant, and when one of the men normally at the post developed a sudden illness, Nova had been tapped as a temporary replacement. He was the kind of guard they liked, adept with either weapons or his bare hands. Mostly the room was empty the entire shift, and there was little to do but think. However, toward the end of the shift, Governor Tarkin and Darth Vader had arrived. Nova could not help but overhear, of course, as the two had a discussion that ranged across several topics, mostly concerned with the next target for the Death Star. It seemed that the rebels' main fortress had been located, and they were awaiting reports from the scouts before spacing there to destroy that planet as well. Nova was still reeling from the results of the most recent test. He had passed out in his sonic shower at precisely the instant that the super laser had shattered the peaceful world of Alderaan, and he was certain this was no coincidence. The doctor's diagnosis about midi-chlorians had to be connected. He'd done research on it with the station archivist's help, and had come to the reluctant conclusion that he was somehow receptive to the pervasive energy field the Jedi had called the Force. A Force-sensitive was the term. It explained why he sometimes could anticipate the moves of his opponents, the skill he called blink. He wasn't sure what to do about this. He wasn't even sure that anything could be done. It had evidently been with him to a certain degree for his whole life. It wasn't just going to go away. Since he seemed to be stuck with it, and the visions it brought, maybe there was something he could do with it besides just dodge incoming fists. The door opened, and a senior officer marched in, as stiff as if he had a Durasteel rod for a spine. The man gave his report, and Nova kept his face stolid as he listened. So, the girl that the doctor had spoken of in the cantina had given Tarkin and Vader a false lead. Brave, but not very smart, since Tarkin was now irritated enough to tell Vader to execute her. Once upon a time, Nova would have shrugged that bit of news away. It wasn't his business how the higher-ups behaved. He just followed his orders and did his job, a good and loyal soldier. But if blowing up Despair had been terrible, killing Alderaan was several orders of magnitude more horrifying. Billions of innocents had died there, not hardened and convicted criminals. Billions of civilians of all ages. And how could you, in good conscience, serve somebody who thought that was the way to wage war? It had rocked him to his core, maybe more because of the whole Force thing. But he hadn't been the only one. Sure, there were always some kill-em-all types who said they must have deserved it, else it wouldn't have been done. But there were a lot of people on this battle station who couldn't accept these actions as things even to be contemplated in a sane and rational universe. It wasn't supposed to have gone this far. From everything he'd heard, it was to be merely the threat of Mundicide. Blowing up a planet, killing everything that lived on it, just to make a point? This was his last tour, Nova decided. He wasn't going to stay in a military that would commit such atrocities. And if there was anything he could do to help prevent it from happening again, he ought to seriously consider it. Killing civilian populations on a planetary scale was evil beyond comprehension. Nova could fight a room full of men straight up, face to face, and if he had to kill half of them to survive, he'd do it. But he hadn't signed on to slaughter children asleep in their beds. Library and Archives, Deck 106, Death Star. Atur Wrighton considered himself a man of the galaxy. He had traveled far and wide and seen much. He had toured the spice mines of Kessel, explored the ruins of Dantooine, and witnessed the death of stars in the Byboran cluster. Even though most of his working days had been within the walls of libraries and archives, he had also breathed the outside air of scores of worlds in the course of his years. And he had remained apolitical for all those years, going his own way, avoiding commitments to things he didn't think he could influence, yea or nay. But not anymore. Not after Alderaan. The destruction of Despair had been bad enough, as much for what it had portended as for the act itself. But Alderaan had been a peaceful world. Its government had sympathized with the rebels, true enough, but the Empire's reaction had been overkill in the most horrifyingly literal sense imaginable. The immensity of it overwhelmed him each time his imagination started down that killing road. Mothers, babies, grandfathers, pets, all wiped out in a heartbeat. He could not help but be reminded of the Merlissi saying, "Evil compounds exponentially." It was true. Such horrors inevitably fed upon themselves, mushrooming into the unthinkable in very short order. Atur could not stand to see this happen again. He was old. He had lived a long and full life, and he decided now that whatever days he had left, he would dedicate to defeating an empire capable of such abominations. Percy, initiate a search for weak points in this battle station, those that might be most vulnerable to internal sabotage. That would be unwise, sir. Such a scan would almost certainly be detected, and Imperial intelligence operatives would undoubtedly wish to engage in conversation with the initiator of such a search. It would not be a pleasant conversation. Then I suggest you do it cautiously. Sir, I feel compelled to point out again that the risk of such a venture would be great. And I appreciate your concern, Atur said. He leaned back in his form-fit chair and steepled his fingers. "Do it anyway." The droid acknowledged this order and shuffled away to implement it. Auteur sighed. He realized that PRC-3 was going to suffer a traumatic memory loss in the near future. That would be a shame. He'd actually become rather fond of the droid. But given the gravity of what the Empire had done and must be made to pay for, the price of a droid's memory, and one old man's life come to that, was small enough. Conference room, command center, Death Star. The intercom cheeped, and Tarkin activated it. "Yes?" The voice from the comm said, "We've captured a freighter entering the remains of the Alderaan system. Its markings match those of a ship that blasted its way out of Mos Eisley." Tarkin frowned. Mos Eisley was on Tatooine, where the stolen battle station plans had, according to Vader, landed. Coincidence? Not likely. He looked at Vader, who said, "They must be trying to return the stolen plans to the Princess. She may yet be of some use to us." Tarkin considered that. Yes. While his anger at her deception had not abated, there were more important things at stake here than one prisoner's life or death. Vader was right. She might be useful as a decoy. "Best you go and personally deal with this, Lord Vader." Docking Bay 2037, Death Star. Vader stalked into the bay as a lieutenant and several stormtroopers exited the captured freighter. The lieutenant said, "There's no one on board, sir. According to the log, the crew abandoned ship right after takeoff. It must be a decoy, sir. Several of the escape pods have been jettisoned." Vader nodded. "Did you find any droids?" "No, sir. If there were any on board, they must also have been jettisoned." "Send a scanning crew aboard. I want every part of this ship checked." "Yes, sir." Vader was about to speak again when he felt a ripple in the Force. It was fleeting, too brief to grasp before it flitted away, but startling. Almost to himself, he said, "I sense something. A presence I've not felt since." He stopped. No. He must be mistaken. It could not be after all these years. Abruptly, he turned away. If the plans were on the ship, they would be found. If not, then the ship was of no importance. As for that tingle in the Force, well, if it was indeed generated by who he thought it might be, then no doubt the man responsible had sensed Vader as well. If Obi-Wan Kenobi was really aboard the Death Star, then it was inevitable that they would meet. The Force would draw them together as surely as opposite particles in a vacuum. 61. Library and Archives, Deck 106, Death Star. "Odd," PRC-3 said. Auteur looked up. "What?" The droid turned away from the monitor, its data display reflecting from its blue Durasteel chassis. "Someone has just accessed the main computer in a forward bay command office. And this is unusual because the access is via droid interface plug, which was put there for droids, if I'm not mistaken," Auteur said. "So?" "The accessor is requesting information on the location of terminals controlling a tractor beam recently used to capture a ship suspected of being a rebel freighter." Auteur frowned. "Who would do that? Is the tractor generator in need of repair?" "Not that I can determine." "And why are you bringing this to my attention?" "I have flagged operating systems to report unusual events for your protection, sir." Is there a security cam in that office?" "Yes, sir." "Can you access it?" "Not without the security codes." "Oh, those. Here." Auteur tapped a 10-digit number into the computer console. "Having that code is illegal," PRC-3 said. "You could be arrested for it." "That would likely be the least of my crimes. Access the cam." The droid turned back to the terminal. "I have visual only, no sound." "A pixel is worth 1,000 bytes. And isn't that a strange saying to be coming out of the mouth of an archivist?" "Sir?" "Never mind.
The cam. Put it on my terminal. The hollow over Auteur's desk lit. What he saw was the interior of a command office in which were standing 2 stormtroopers, their helmets removed. They seemed unremarkable, although their haircuts were a bit long for regulation status. There were others as well who were not so unremarkable. A golden protocol droid, an astromech unit, a Wookiee with a bowcaster, and a balding and bearded older human in a hooded cloak with the cowl pulled back. Auteur realized with slight surprise that the old man was dressed in the vestments of a Jedi Knight. There were also the bodies of 2 Imperial troopers lying on the deck. It appeared from their attitude that the humans were listening to the protocol droid. Then, after a moment, the humans started talking to each other. "Percy, can you lip read?" "Certainly, sir." "Tell me what they are saying." Percy watched the image for a moment. The oldest one just said to the younger of the stormtroopers, "Your destiny lies along a different path from mine. The Force will be with you always." The Force? As Auteur digested this, the command office door slid up, and the old man exited. One of the stormtroopers and the Wookiee had a brief conversation. "Sorry, sir, but I can't see the Wookiee clearly enough to read what he is saying. The older human male just said to the younger, 'Where did you dig up that old fossil?'" Auteur frowned, perplexed. What did that mean? "The youngest one appears to be speaking now, but I can't see his face. The 2 humans appear agitated, judging by their body language." Auteur continued to watch as both men stopped arguing and looked at the droids. "I surmise the droids are speaking," Percy said. "Now the older human has just said, 'Princess.' 'Where is she?' the younger one asks. 'Princess.' Percy, check the main computer for information on Princess." The droid tapped console controls as Auteur continued to watch the image. The 2 men were talking now, both somewhat agitated. The younger one, no more than a boy, really, seemed to be trying to convince the older one of something. "Sir, a human female, Princess Leia Organa, was recently brought aboard by Darth Vader. A rebel, according to the files, and scheduled to be terminated." Auteur shook his head in incredulity. It seemed obvious that the 2 men he was watching were not stormtroopers, and that they were here due in some part to Princess Leia. He knew the name, of course, Bail Organa's daughter, of the late planet Alderaan. The protocol droid shuffled forward and handed the boy a pair of electronic stun cuffs. The boy moved toward the Wookiee and attempted to put the cuffs on him. The Wookiee did not seem at all pleased with the idea. The boy backed away quickly, turned to the older man, who wasn't really all that old himself, and gave him the binders. "Percy, what are they saying?" "Chewie, I think I know what he has in mind." That from the older one. The man put the cuffs on the Wookiee's wrists. "Ah," Auteur said. "Sir? I don't understand." "They are apparently marching right into the Nexu's den." He smiled. "They have come for the princess." "That hardly seems wise." "No, it seems foolhardy in the extreme. How will they escape if they do find—" "Aha." "I am still at a loss, sir." "That's why they're investigating the tractor beam. They must mean to steal a ship. I'll wager that the old man, a Jedi if I'm not mistaken, has gone to disable the device." "Clever." Auteur frowned. "Unlikely they will succeed, however." The men and the stun-cuffed Wookiee exited the room, leaving the 2 droids alone in the office. "I think we've seen enough of this," Auteur said. "Where is the princess being held?" PRC-3 adjusted a control on the console. "Level 5, detention block AA-23. Auteur nodded. He didn't fancy their chances of success, but he had to give them credit for bravery. He would have helped them, but he didn't see any way that he could. Detention cells were controlled locally. They couldn't be overridden by the central computer. It occurred to him then that they would have to take a lift up to the detention level, and they would need the current code to reach that level. Perhaps they already had access to it.
but he doubted it. Well, he couldn't magically open cell doors for them, but finding the proper protocol for section egress and feeding it to the lift they would be taking was the work of only a few moments. "Good luck," Auteur said softly after transmitting the code. "You'll need it." As for himself, what he needed was a drink. 62. The Hardheart Cantina, Death Star. Mima had asked Rodo to remove the few patrons who were having too much fun, and what was left was a somber crowd, mostly people who kept their conversations to themselves or had conversations with themselves. Either way, they did it quietly. Rodo and Nova Steele sat at the bar with Ratua. It was apparent that the bond he and Nova had formed on the prison planet was stronger than their differences as guard and prisoner. Mima was glad to see that. There were a couple of Alderaanians in one corner, and they just sat there, not saying much, not drinking much, just staring into some personal distance. One of the pilots and his companion, an architect, Mima had learned, also sat at the bar, talking quietly but intensely. Apparently the pilot was one of Nova's martial arts students, a double ace named Vil Dance. The woman was named Tila Kars. An older man entered the cantina. Mima recognized him as having been in before, but she didn't know who he was. He walked to where Steele and Rodo and Ratua sat, and was greeted by the sergeant. For herself, Mima tended the bar, made drinks, and when there was a lull, drifted over to talk to Green Eyes. It felt like a memorial service, and in its own way it was. A pair of troopers entered and moved to a table near the Alderaanians. They ordered ales, and seemed oblivious to the generally hushed mood in the cantina. Mima was considering having Rodo throw them out, too, when one of the two said something loud enough to carry to the bar. "Guess the rebel scum won't be giving us much trouble after Alderaan, hey?" Rodo was already up and moving when one of the Alderaanians stood and stepped over to the soldier's table. "Rodo," Mima said. He stopped, turned, and looked at her. She held up her hand in a "wait a second" gesture. The soldier glanced up at the man standing next to him, and probably wasn't impressed. The Alderaanian was slightly built, short, and hardly seemed a threat. "What can I—" That was as far as he got. The smaller man swung a fist that was driven by grief and rage, and the soldier fell out of his chair and hit the deck, hard. "Go," Mima said to Rodo. Rodo was there before the second soldier could do more than get to his feet. He grabbed him by the neck. "Out," he said. "The fripp, you say? Nobody punches a trooper," and Rodo tightened his grip on the man's neck. The trooper suddenly became very quiet. "Out," Rodo repeated. "On your own or with my help. Get your buddy and get gone." The second soldier was not a fool. He nodded, bent, and helped his dazed friend to his unsteady feet. They headed for the door. The Alderaanian, fists still clenched in simmering rage, face red, stood there glaring at Rodo. Mima knew that even though he didn't have a prayer against the big bouncer, he would still swing on him if Rodo tried to evict him. Rodo knew it also. He glanced at her. She shook her head. "Leave him be." Rodo nodded, said something too soft to hear to the smaller man, and returned to the bar. After a moment, the Alderaanian, as if in a dreamlike trance, shuffled back to his seat. His motions were stiff, droid-like, and he sat down heavily. Rodo returned to the bar, and Mima moved to meet him. "What did you say to him?" "I told him I was sorry, that his table was comped, and that if anybody else said anything that stupid, to let me handle it. I could hit harder than he could." Next to him, Nova said, "I don't know. That was as good a punch as I've ever seen." Nobody replied to that. Nova indicated the older man and said, "This is Commander Wrighton. He runs the library." Mima nodded. "Commander?" "Call me Auteur," he said. "I don't much care for the rank, or its associations right now." Mima nodded. "I hear that." She looked at the door and saw Dr. Davini come in. He came straight to the bar, where he was greeted by the group and introduced to the librarian and the young couple. Missing all the fun, Doc, Nova said. That little Alderanian in the corner just decked a soldier twice his size. Yulie nodded, as Mima, unasked, put a stein of ale in front of him. Rhodo didn't throw him out? Our sympathies do not lie with the Imperial military tonight, Mima said. Yulie nodded again. Nor mine. I feel tainted just being on this station. That got a chorus of agreement. There ought to be something we can do about this, Nova said. Rhodo said, What did you have in mind, Sarge? Challenging Darth Vader to a death match? Maybe. That wouldn't help, Yulie said. The Imperial machine is too big. Nobody can stand against it. Witness Alderaan. So what does a person with any sense of justice do? Mima asked. Shrug it off and go on about his or her business? Wrighton, who had been quietly nursing his drink, shook his head. To Nova, he said, As a martial arts expert, what do you do if you have an opponent who is bigger, stronger, faster, better trained and armed, and who has many friends? Nova shrugged. Haul your glutes away, fast. Precisely, Wrighton said. They all turned to look at him. At the very least, you don't have to abet a murderous thug. Dance, the TIE pilot, spoke up. Refusing a direct order gets you sent to the detention cells. How's that going to do you or anybody else any good? Well, Wrighton said, you might not be part of the solution tucked away in a cell, but at least you won't be part of the problem. Some choice, Dance said. There are other choices, Wrighton said. Really? What? The Archivist regarded his drink as if it were possible to read the future in it. You could leave. Dance laughed, and it was far more bitter than amused. Yeah, and just how would you pull that off? Nobody leaves the Death Star without the express permission of the powers that be. Even pilots like me. You can't get far in a TIE fighter unless you have one of those new hyperdrive-equipped X-ones I've been hearing about. And there are but a couple of those on the whole station. We have more weapons than a naval armada, tractor beams, turbo lasers, and a bunch of bored, trigger-happy gunners who'd like nothing better than to shoot anything that moves. Leaving isn't exactly an option. But if it was, what if you could go? Would anybody here exercise that choice? There was a moment of silence. We're talking hypothetically here. Not real conspiracy to treason, right? Nova said. Of course. Just a what-if conversation among friends. I'd go, Mima said. They looked at her. You aren't in the military, Ratchua said. You didn't have anything to do with blowing up Alderaan. You're a civilian. It's not like you pulled the lever. Imagine what that must feel like, Kars said. But I am here, Mima said, in answer to Ratchua. And I know what the Death Star can do. What it's already done. I serve drinks to people like that soldier the little guy knocked down, who not only think it's okay to kill planets full of innocence, but actually take pride in it. She shook her head hard enough to swing her leku. I'd go in a heartbeat. Kars nodded. Me too. Of course, I'm a prisoner, and when it all settles down, I doubt that the Empire will have much use for me. Assuming the Empire wins, Rhodo said. Can't really assume anything else, Dance said. We all know what this battle station can do. If they can build one, they can build more, maybe even bigger than this one. The rebels don't have a chance. Perhaps, Wrighton said. But wars are not won by technology alone. There's always a new version of the ultimate weapon being developed, and historically they've never been enough to put an end to war. Peace is found neither in hot blood nor in cold sweat, Nova said. Wrighton looked at him in mild surprise. The Fallacy of War, by Codus Romanthus. One doesn't often encounter a soldier who can quote obscure philosophers. Nova drained the last of his ale. I'm sensitive. He belched. I'd go, Yulie said. I'd have bailed 100 times already if there had been any real opportunity. Me too. What about you, Sarge?
That from Ratua. Yeah, count me in. Not just because my head nearly exploded when they burned Alderaan, but because it's wrong. People get killed in war, but it's one thing to shoot a guy shooting at you. It's another to go to his house and burn it down with his wife and kids inside. Dan said, Yeah. One-on-one against another pilot? I'm good. What the Empire did to Despair and Alderaan, that's not right. Next planet might be one of our home worlds. Nobody's safe. Anywhere. All very high-minded of us, Rodo said. But we don't have that choice, do we? Wrighton said, Maybe we do. They all turned to look at him again. What are you talking about? Nova asked. Wrighton said, I'm an archivist. Over the years, I've learned ways to obtain all kinds of information that isn't supposed to be accessible. Yeah, so? Ratua said. Knowledge is power, Wrighton said. What if you knew the entry and takeoff codes for an Imperial shuttle that was fueled and ready to fly? What if you had the passcodes that would keep the station's gunners from firing on you when you left? Or the tractor beams from locking on to you? Big what-ifs, Rodo said. Indeed. But, again, hypothetically, and just for the sake of this discussion, suppose that I could lay hands on this information. Should I bother? The group was quiet for what seemed a long time. Finally, it was Nova who broke the silence. Yeah, he said. Go ahead and bother. 63. Conference room, command level, Death Star. Vader stood at just inside the door, the guards flanking him, talking to a frankly incredulous Tarkin. He is here, he said. Obi-Wan Kenobi. What makes you think so? To anyone with a connection to the Force, the question would not need an answer or an explanation. Even though Vader had thought initially to brush it off, he had for so many years hoped to feel that presence that at first he thought he'd imagined it. He knew. He said, A tremor in the Force. The last time I felt it was in the presence of my old master. Tarkin stood. Surely he must be dead by now. Don't underestimate the Force, Vader said. Though he knew it was pointless, the man could not understand. The Jedi are extinct. Their fire has gone out of the universe. The intercom on the table chimed. Tarkin moved toward it, continuing to speak. You, my friend, are all that's left of their religion. No, Tarkin could not understand. He had no way of grasping the concept. It was like trying to explain color to someone blind from birth. Yes, Tarkin said into the intercom. The voice from the unit was terse. We have an emergency alert in detention block AA-23. Tarkin frowned. He obviously knew the significance of that location. The Princess. Put all sections on alert. Vader did not need the confirmation, but this new event might help convince Tarkin. He said, Obi-Wan is here. The Force is with him. Tarkin, always quick to shift stances when he realized it was necessary, said, If you're right, he must not be allowed to escape. It was a reasonable conclusion for someone who did not know their history, but wrong. Escape is not his plan. I must face him, alone. Vader turned and strode out of the room. Now that he was certain his old master was on this station, he would be able to find him. The Force was sometimes maddeningly inexact. There were times when, even knowing what he was, you could stand next to a Jedi Master and not feel his power. At other times, you could sense him on the other side of a planet, or halfway across a stellar system. Distance was no barrier to the Force. The swirls of energy often hid as much as they revealed. But Vader knew Obi-Wan was here, and he knew he would be able to find him. Find him, and after all these years of waiting, destroy him. Guard unit lockers, Deck 17, Death Star. Nova arrived for his shift only a few minutes late, still chewing on the conversation in the cantina. He had gotten most of his armor on,
and why they had to wear that inside the battle station made no sense at all to him. The 18-piece suit was a pain to don, and it offered only limited protection against a regulation power blaster anyway. But regs were regs. The lieutenant suddenly turned from the comm board and yelled at him. "Sergeant Steele, we have intruders. There's a breakout on level 5, detention block AA-23. Take a squad and get over there." Steele stared at the lieutenant. Intruders? A breakout? How was that possible? "Sergeant, move out." "Copy, sir, on our way. Brett and Zach, Dash, Alex, Kai, with me. Mal, Cy, Dex, Nate, on point. Move out, people." The squad hustled out of the barracks and into the hall, the sound of their armor rattling as they moved. The corridors were strangely deserted, it seemed to Nova, which he chalked up to luck. Fewer people meant fewer civilian casualties. "Who are we after, Sarge?" That from Dash. Nova didn't know. Who were they after? Well, Carkett, he'd know them if he saw them. "Just shoot who I tell you to," he told the trooper. Then he raised his voice to include the rest of the squad. "Double time it, people." They ran through the gray and black halls, following the 4 guards on point, their sidearms held up, fingers outside the trigger guards as per regulations. The ceilings and floors were covered with blaster-proof absorbitol, so if somebody accidentally cooked off a round, it wouldn't do any damage. If you carried your weapon pointed at the floor, however, there was a good chance in a crowd that you'd shoot somebody's foot off, and the walls and vent grates weren't all that sturdy either. The corridor branched ahead. As they approached, Nova desperately tried to remember which one led to D Unit. Ahead, a blaster bolt sizzled through a cross corridor, and the 4 guards on point skidded to a stop, then moved ahead slowly toward the intersection to peer around it. Nova suddenly realized that this was one of his dreams. It was as if he had been here before, seen the events that were now unfolding. "Ah!" Somebody beyond the bend in the corridor screamed, and a moment later 6 troopers barreled around the corner of the hallway intersection heading toward Nova. They were being chased by a single man with a blaster, yelling like a berserker as he ran. The man, Nova saw that he was dressed like a down-on-his-luck spacer, stopped, realizing that there were suddenly overwhelming odds in front of him. Then he turned and ran back the other way, putting on a burst of speed as he disappeared around the corner. "After him! Go!" Nova led the pursuit, followed by his squad and the others. Once around the bend, he saw that the fleeing spacer had been joined by a Wookiee, and both of them were now shooting back at their pursuers as they fled. They returned fire, but no one was hitting anything. The excited troopers were just spraying blaster fire. They wouldn't hit the 2. He was sure of it. But how could he know that? They rounded a corner. "Close the blast doors," somebody yelled. The heavy durasteel panels ahead began to iris shut, but the running man and the Wookiee managed to leap through before they closed completely. "Open the blast doors! Open the blast doors!" somebody was now shouting. It was almost comical. Since he was the closest, Nova reached for the controls. But in that moment, he hesitated. He knew, felt it in a way that he couldn't explain but also could not deny, that the man and the Wookiee they were after had to escape, that somehow it would be, as the old Archivist had said, part of the solution and not part of the problem. How could he know this? Was it part of the connection to the Force that the doc had talked about? Nova didn't know. It seemed crazy, but he had to acknowledge what he felt. One of the troopers said, "Sarge, you gonna open the doors?" "I'm trying. The switch is jammed." He moved his armored hand over the controls, pretending to try to move them, knowing that none of his men could see what he was doing. A few more seconds might make the difference. He could give them that much. "Still not working," Nova said. He activated his comlink. "Blast Control, this is Sergeant Steele. Operating number 439-570-437. I need an override on the blast doors. Level 5, Corridor 6. Open them." "Manual controls appear to be functional on all doors in that corridor," came back the reply through his helmet's comm set. "And I'm telling you, they aren't. You're going to open it or let the terrorists we're chasing escape." "Acknowledged." The blast doors opened. "Let's go," Nova said. Ahead, the corridor branched. Again, he could not say how he knew, but he was sure the fugitives had taken the turn to port. "Which way, Sarge?" "To the right," Nova said, and led the charge. "There's your chance, friend," he thought. "I hope you make good use of it." 64. Corridor outside Docking Bay 2037, Death Star. There he was. After so much time and across so much space, the hooded figure of Obi-Wan Kenobi, his former master and friend, stood right in front of him. He had aged. His face was lined, his beard white. It was impossible not to remember vividly the last time they had seen each other, when his master had crippled him and left him to die on the fiery banks of a river of molten rock, light years from here. Now his anger smoldered in him like the banks of that coursing stream of lava. "You should have killed me then, Obi-Wan." Vader lit his lightsaber. The red beam crackled with power. Obi-Wan had already known Vader was there, of course. The Force swirled about the two of them, forging a link impossible to miss. Vader strode toward the old man. As he drew nearer, Obi-Wan ignited his own lightsaber. The blue gleam of the blade flashed brightly. "I've been waiting for you, Obi-Wan. We meet again at last. The circle is now complete." Vader raised his weapon to attack, and Obi-Wan matched his pose. "When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master." "Only a master of evil, Darth." With that, Obi-Wan stepped in and cut. Vader blocked the attack easily. Obi-Wan attacked again and again. Vader blocked each strike. If the old man thought he could rattle him by attacking instead of defending, he was mistaken. Vader riposted, sped up his timing, and took the initiative, forcing the erstwhile Jedi to defend. He still had some skill, his old master did, but he was out of practice. Vader could feel it through the Force. Obi-Wan twirled and blocked a slash, then wove a defensive pattern with his blade. The Force was still with the old Jedi. He was able to anticipate Vader's strikes and block or parry them, but after a quick exchange, Vader felt the energy shift in his favor. "Your powers are weak, old man." There had always been in Vader a small bit of worry about this day. Not much, just a trace. He had been sure in his youthful arrogance that he had been stronger, had been better than the Jedi Knight who had been his teacher, and the memory of what Obi-Wan had done to him would never be erased. He had been a superior fighter even when he had been Anakin Skywalker, and yet Obi-Wan had defeated him. Could he win now? It was as if the old man could read his thoughts. "You can't win, Darth. If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine." Vader knew that Obi-Wan was taunting him by using the Sith honorific, but he would not allow himself to be baited. Obi-Wan lunged again, attacking, but Vader was ready. Their sabers clashed, sparks spewed, the stink of ozone wafted over them, but Vader stood his ground. The blades slid along each other's length, then stopped, bound together in the magnetic handle guards, the men face to face. Vader shoved, hard, and they broke the clash. Obi-Wan retreated a step. Vader felt the fierce anticipation of victory pound in his heart. "You should not have come back," he told the old Jedi. Another exchange, 4, 5, 6 attacks and blocks, and Vader knew the old man was weakening. The Force might be strong in Obi-Wan, but the dark side was stronger in Vader. It let him anticipate his adversary's strikes and counter them almost before they began. Obi-Wan knew it, too. He began a retreat, backing away, his lightsaber itself seeming weaker as he moved. Vader backed Obi-Wan past an open blast door leading to the forward dock where the rebel freighter was being held under guard. The old man was obviously tiring. "You're mine, old man," Vader thought. But just as he was ready to deliver the final strike, Obi-Wan managed a fast series of attacks, and Vader had to move quickly to avoid the strikes. Even as old and weak as Obi-Wan was, his technique was accomplished enough that a foolish move on Vader's part could still be fatal. A group of stormtroopers standing in the dock became aware of them. Vader felt rather than saw them, noticed the strange duel, and sensed the troopers heading toward them. He did not wish them to interfere, but even to warn them off would take concentration that he could not afford at the moment. Should his attention falter, Obi-Wan could kill him in the blink of an eye. Vader heard someone call from the dock. "Ben?" It was a young man's voice. Still, he could not risk a look in that direction. But Obi-Wan glanced away quickly, then looked back at Vader. Then he did the last thing Vader could have possibly imagined. He smiled. It was an expression not the least worried, almost beatific, in fact. Then, still smiling, Obi-Wan lifted his lightsaber so that the tip pointed straight up at the ceiling. The action was so totally unexpected that Vader paused for an instant in shock. Not even the Force had lent impressions concerning this. His former master had left himself wide open. Was it a trap? It didn't matter. If it was, Obi-Wan wasn't fast enough or strong enough to spring it in time. Vader shifted his lightsaber and cut from the right, hard, aiming for the neck. His lightsaber sheared through the old man as if the latter were no denser than the air itself, and Obi-Wan collapsed. Yes! Fierce, exultant joy coursed through the man who had been Anakin Skywalker. He had done it. He had slain Obi-Wan Kenobi. His revenge was complete. From a distance, he heard someone scream, "No!" a cry of utter despair. But Vader paid it no heed. The dark side surged within him as powerfully as he had ever felt it. For an instant. But then it stopped. What had just happened? Vader looked down at the body. But there was no body. Only Obi-Wan's robes and cloak. This was impossible. It could not be. The squad of stormtroopers began firing at somebody in the docking bay, but Vader could not be bothered to look. He stepped forward, stared down in disbelief. An illusion of some kind? Some Jedi mind trick that the old man had never imparted to him? Impossible. Obi-Wan had taught him everything Vader knew. But, whispered a voice from within, maybe not everything that Obi-Wan knew. Vader reached out with his boot to touch the corpse, but he only stirred the empty vestments, charred by the lightsaber's heat, with his questing foot. Obi-Wan Kenobi was gone. How could this be? For the first time that he could remember, the dark side had no answer, and a great surge of unfamiliar emotion suddenly washed over him. Darth Vader, the Dark Lord of the Sith's apprentice, one of the two most powerful beings in the galaxy, was afraid. 65. Command Center, Death Star. Tarkin watched the recording of Vader fighting the old man in a lightsaber duel, fascinated. Obi-Wan Kenobi had survived all these years. Who would have believed it? That he was still able to make a fight of it against Darth Vader was even more impressive. The man looked old enough to be Vader's father, and then some. Amazing. The sound was not the best quality, but Tarkin could hear some of the exchanges between the two fighters. One statement from Kenobi in particular struck him. Something about becoming more powerful than his ex-student could possibly imagine if Vader struck him down. How droll. Had Kenobi expected Vader to flee in superstitious terror by telling him such a thing? The thought had barely crossed Tarkin's mind, however, when moments later Vader did indeed strike the old man down, and the former Jedi simply disappeared, leaving nothing behind but his robes and cloak. Tarkin stared at the image, his jaw dropping in disbelief. This was impossible. There had to be some trick at work. Nobody could survive decapitation by a lightsaber. "Lord Vader is on his way in," came a voice from the intercom. Tarkin nodded. He switched off the recording and changed to an external view of the starfield, which he stood regarding. After a moment, Vader entered the room and came to stand next to him. "Are they away?" Tarkin asked. "They have just made the jump into hyperspace." "You're sure the homing beacon is secure aboard their ship? I'm taking an awful risk, Vader. This had better work." It was indeed a risk, letting the princess and her band of rogues escape. If it didn't work, they would not only lose a high-level prisoner and a couple of rebel spies, they would lose the Death Star plans as well. And even though Tarkin tended to agree with Motti that having the plans wouldn't really do the Alliance any good now that the battle station was operational, he wasn't interested in taking any risks with the ultimate weapon. But if the escapees fled to the main rebel fortress, as Vader was certain they would, the war would be over sooner than expected. Much sooner. The plans, after all, would hardly survive the destruction of whatever planet they came to rest upon. The Death Star was at last operational, and there was no place in the galaxy where a beat-up Corellian freighter could run that they could not follow. Library and Archives, Death Star. Making good on his promise that he could retrieve classified information and use it was proving to be somewhat harder than Artur Wrighton had anticipated. While he had certain codes that would allow him to access restricted files, the nuts and bolts operation of a vessel as large as this one was not a simple matter. There were so many subsystems, so many backups and redundant programs, that winnowing out the precise details was time-consuming in the extreme. Were it not for PRC-3, he would never have been able to manage it. "What do we have so far?" he asked the droid. "And please skip the part where you warn me how dangerous it is." PRC-3 said, "I have accessed the shuttlecraft codes. The vessel most likely to be of use is the E-2T medical shuttle, a small, fast ambulance craft. It is unarmed and clearly marked as a non-combat medical transport, and under normal circumstances, neither the Rebel Alliance nor the Empire will fire on it. It also has limited hyperdrive capability. It generally carries a crew of 6 with facilities to transport and maintain twice that many human-sized patients." "Good, good. That gives us plenty of room. What about the tractor beam?" "Recent misuse of tractor beam controls has resulted in increased security. However, surreptitious programming using an Ouroboros routine will, with a proper activation signal, result in a temporary overload to the beam projector's circuit breaker in the sector from which the ship would, in theory, be departing. This will keep that particular projector offline for approximately 30 seconds before the automatic reset. A return to full power will require 15 seconds more. A pilot of sufficient skill should be able to accelerate far enough during that time to be out of range. However, if he ventures into the path of any of the other sector's beams, they could capture the ship." "Excellent." "I have not, however, been able to bypass bay door controls for egress. Those systems are not yet linked to the main computer." "That's not good," Artur said. "If we can't get the shuttle launched, the rest doesn't matter." "So it would seem." Artur considered the problem. "What is the procedure for standard emergency medical transport launch?" "The onboard crew sends a copy of its orders to bay door control and requests permission to depart. The flight plan is checked via comlink to flight control, and if valid, the officer in charge gives the order to his technicians. A force field sufficient to retain atmosphere, but permeable enough to allow vessels to penetrate, is produced. The vessel exits, the doors are closed and sealed, the field is shut off." Artur nodded. "So the only reasonable solution here is to have the doors opened by the BDC crew?" "Yes." Can you produce a bogus flight plan, an order for transmission?" "I can. But I cannot insert that plan into the flight control systems, which are independent of the main computer. They will have no record of them." "But you can jam or redirect communications if you have the op-chan frequencies?" "Certainly, sir. Even you could do that." Artur gave him a look. "So if the door crew sends a signal to the flight control crew, and instead of getting to them it goes somewhere else, then whoever gets that call could verify the orders?" "In theory," the droid said. "Well, then that problem is solved. You'll just have it set up so that call comes here." The droid turned to regard him. "Oh, don't look at me like that. I won't be here. You will take the call and verify it." "That would be illegal, sir. I cannot knowingly violate Imperial law." "But if I am on that shuttle and you don't confirm the order, then I'll be arrested and possibly even executed." In that case, my primary programming, which is to protect you from harm, would allow such illegal activity. Atur slapped PRC-3 on the back. Good man. I knew I could count on you. Yes, sir. Set it up, Percy. I have a feeling we won't have a lot of time. Once this station comes out of hyperspace, things will get very active around here. Right away, sir. I'm going to pay a visit to the local cantina now. Let me know when you get everything done. Conference room, command center, Death Star. Vader was still attempting to come to terms with the disappearance of Obi-Wan. His moment of triumph, as he'd cut the old man down, had been short-lived. How ironic that he'd been constantly telling non-believers like Tarkin not to underestimate the power of the Force, and now he'd witnessed an event that made him realize he was guilty of just such heresy himself. His master had never spoken of Jedi just vanishing into nothingness. This bespoke a power that Vader had not yet seen, even in the dark side. But surely it must exist there. Perhaps it had something to do with the darksome hints that his master had dropped from time to time about Darth Plagueis, the Sith Lord who had been Darth Sidious's master. Plagueis had been, according to the Emperor, obsessed with the preservation of the immaterial ego after the physical death of the body. Vader determined to ask his master about it as soon as this distracting foolishness with the rebels was... The intercom beeped. Tarkin answered it. Yes? We are approaching the planet Yavin, a tech said. The rebel base is on a moon on the far side. We are preparing to orbit the planet. Tarkin smiled as he disconnected and looked at Vader. Well, Lord Vader, it seems you were correct. We are almost in position to break the back of the Alliance. I am sure the Emperor will be pleased. If the station performs as it is supposed to, Vader said. He believed that it would, but Tarkin seemed a bit too smug and sure of himself. It served him to keep the man slightly on the defensive. Oh, it will, Tarkin said. I guarantee it will. 66. The Hardheart Cantina, Death Star. Mima had closed the cantina again, this time ostensibly to repair a malfunctioning cooler unit. Ratchua came back to the bar, waving a small electronic device. Sniffer says we're still clean. No listening devices have been brought in since we got here. That's good, Rodo said, because if we weren't involved in a conspiracy that would get us all shot before, we sure are now. Mima looked around at the others. Wrighton, the instigator, Dance, the TIE pilot, Kars, the architect, Steele, the guard, Davini, the doctor, Rodo, Ratchua, and herself. 8 of them against the might of the Empire. Not very good odds, Mima thought. One misstep and they were all dead. Any questions? Wrighton asked. It seems too easy, Rodo said. Not really, Nova said. The station is designed to withstand massive attack from without, but nobody worries too much about security within. The place is full of stormtroopers, guards, Army and Navy personnel, even a few bounty hunters thrown in. Plus, the only ways in or out are well protected, and if you do manage to get out, there are enough guns to turn you into subatomic particles, and 24 tractor beam batteries to hold you still while they do it. There was a small jolt. Everyone reacted uneasily. What now? Yuli asked. Just came out of hyperspace, Vil observed. Wherever we were going, we're probably there. The Yavin system, Wrighton said. 3 planets, the only one of which concerns us being Yavin Prime, a gas giant with a number of habitable moons. And why is this important? Ratchua asked. Remember the rebel freighter that escaped? The one with the doc's girlfriend on it? Nova asked. Yuli shook his head. Not my girlfriend, alas, although she made Atur's point about not being part of the problem well enough to convince me to join this raggedy crew. Yeah, well, the scud in the guard shack is that the ship was bugged and let go so we could follow it. Tarkin thinks there's a rebel base here somewhere. Bad for them if it's so, Rodo said. But perhaps not for us, Wrighton said. If the Navy is busy fighting off rebel attack ships,
It might make it easier for us to escape. Nova said, "Nothing the rebels have can get close enough to scratch the finish on the Death Star. Anything bigger than a fighter will get blown apart 1,000 clicks out. Still, during a battle, ambulance ships sometimes get dispatched without causing undue concern." Rodo shook his head. "I hope you and your droid got all this right," he said to the Archivist. "Otherwise, even an ambulance won't do us much good." Tila said, "So what do we do now?" "Go on back to your routine. Keep your heads down and don't cause any fuss. Set your personal comlink to the library's data channel. That's 557.9. As soon as everything is in place, I'll call, and with any luck, that call will be very soon. You'll have 30 minutes to make it to the transport. If everything goes well, we'll be in deep space a couple of minutes after that, and free." "If everything goes well," Vil said. His voice was dry. Library and Archives, Death Star. 2 black-clad security guards were waiting, flanking PRC-3 when Auteur arrived. Auteur felt his insides freeze. "What's going on here?" "Is this droid assigned to you, sir?" "Stay calm." "Yes. Apparently it is malfunctioning, Commander. Our computer security monitor detected it attempting to access restricted data. This must be a mistake. This droid has been performing in an exemplary manner. I couldn't be happier with..." "That may be, sir, but our orders are to take the droid into custody and arrange for a memory scan." "Oh, dear. I'm sorry, Percy." He tried, knowing that it was fruitless. "That may disrupt its ability to function, and it is a most valuable assistant." "I'm sorry, sir, but we have our orders," the guard said. "Come along," he added to the droid. PRC-3 said, "I'm sure it's a simple mistake, Commander Wrighton, and a scan will straighten it all out. Oh, by the way, I did finish those filing chores you asked me to do. I hope they will be of assistance to you." "Good luck, Percy." "And to you, sir." The guards led the droid away. Auteur sighed in regret. Pretty soon, PRC-3 was going to have a mental meltdown. Auteur felt bad about it. Yes, the droid could be reprogrammed, but it wouldn't be the same. Sad. He had liked PRC-3, more than he did most people. But there was a bigger problem to consider. If PRC-3 wasn't here to take the call to verify the medical transport's right to leave the station, it wouldn't be going anywhere. And PRC-3 was gone. It seemed that somebody else would have to be here to take that call. Super Laser Fire Control, Death Star. "Ready to crank it up, Chief?" Ten Granite looked steadily at his CO. "Absolutely, sir," he said. It was a lie, of course. He was not ready. Not after Alderaan. The destruction of the prison planet had been gut-wrenching enough, even though he'd known the place had been home to killers and spice dealers and other scum of the galaxy. He reminded himself of that often, trying to find comfort in it, trying not to think about the thousands of guards and other personnel stationed on Despair, some of whom had been his friends, not to mention the considerable number who had been wrongfully convicted and exiled there, all of whom had also died in fire because he had thrown the lever. Try as he might, he couldn't justify their massacre simply as collateral damage. And even if he could, there was still Alderaan. That hadn't been collateral damage. That had been genocide on a planetary scale. An entire world wiped away, and for what? Why did all those millions of people have to die? As an object lesson, to show the galaxy that the Empire meant business, that Palpatine was not to be trifled with, to make sure that Tarkin's fear doctrine was taken seriously, and to punish, no, to torture a young noblewoman who was part of the rebellion. He'd heard the story from more than one source. There had been no rebel force hidden on Alderaan. If he could have believed there had been, it might have helped. But there had been guards there when Tarkin had told Motti to drop the hammer. They had heard the truth. And it had been 10 who'd pulled the trigger. He had sent the beam that killed at least 1 billion people, maybe more. He didn't know what the planetary population had been.
No doubt there was an up-to-date census in some data file somewhere, but he wasn't going looking for it. He didn't want to know the figures. The bottom line was that he had done it. That knowledge was worse than gut-wrenching. Much worse. 10 hadn't had a peaceful night's sleep since he'd done it. And he didn't see how he ever could again. "Scud is we're on the trail of the rebels," his CO said. "Just wanted to give you a heads up. Stay frosty." He turned and descended the steep stairs, almost a ladder, back down to the deck, leaving 10 alone in the control room. Alone, he thought. If only. 10 knew he would never be alone again. Yes, he was a good soldier, a cog in the well-oiled machine that was the Empire. He followed orders. He did his job. But how could a man live with the knowledge that he, personally, had dropped the curtain on more people at once than anybody had ever done before? How could he live with all those ghosts? He, Master Chief Petty Officer 10 Granite, was the biggest mass murderer in galactic history. That was something to tell those hypothetical great-grandkids about, wasn't it? And now he was about to add still more to the total. Hey, why not? What was a few 100,000, or even 1,000,000 more, when you had already scragged the populations of 2 planets? He didn't know if he could do it again. When the moment came to destroy the rebel base, he wasn't sure he could. He knew he didn't want to. Of that he was certain. But if he didn't, somebody else would, and he'd get tossed into detention for disobeying an order. Then he'd have plenty of time on his hands to think about that moment when he had put every vile dictator or madman who had ever committed genocide to shame. General Grievous, the butcher of Montelian Sarat, Grand Admiral Ishan Ilraz. Pikers, all of them. None of them had ever slain so many so suddenly, so easily. There was an old proverb his grandfather had taught him when he'd been a boy. Take care what you wish for, 10. You might get it. Now he understood exactly what that meant. He had wanted to fire the big gun, and he had gotten to do just that. The only man in the galaxy who had shot it for real, at real targets. And look what it had bought him. Misery beyond his ugliest dreams. Granite, the planet killer. 2 up, 2 down. People were already looking at him funny. Someday this war would be over, and what he had done couldn't be kept a secret. Alderaan had been destroyed, and somebody had done it. The citizens of the Empire, or maybe even the Republic once again, though he didn't see how the Alliance stood a chance now. They'd want to pore over the details of the action, and once they did, they'd find him. They'd hold him up to the light and decry his hideous aspect. Granite, the planet killer. Unique among men. Got a pest problem? Call the chief. Guaranteed to get rid of them all. He wouldn't be able to walk on a street on any civilized planet in the galaxy. People wouldn't be able to abide his presence. Nor would he blame them. He couldn't stop thinking about it. He didn't believe he would ever be able to stop thinking about it. The dead would haunt him forever. How could a man live with that? 67. Command Center, Death Star. Vader and Tarkin watched the schematic representation of Yavin Prime glowing in the air. The smaller image of the moon Yavin 4 behind the translucent gas giant moved in small increments toward the outer perimeter. The voice from the comm said, "Orbiting the planet at maximum velocity. The moon with the rebel base will be in range in 30 minutes." The countdown flashed on the screen. Vader had thought long and hard about his duel with Obi-Wan, and had come to a somewhat satisfying conclusion. Whatever had happened to his body, his old teacher was no more. That was what mattered. Wherever his form had gone, whatever it had become, he would not be seen in this galaxy again. That was more important than anything else. To Tarkin, he said, "This will be a day long remembered. It has seen the end of Kenobi. It will soon see the end of the rebellion." Tarkin glanced at Vader. The latter did not need the Force to sense the Grand Moff's pride. It shone from his face. The culmination of all his decades of work was about to take place. This had been his project from the beginning, and it was about to produce the result he always said it would. How could he not feel proud? "Sir," came the voice from the intercom, "we have picked up small rebel ships leaving the moon and heading our way." Tarkin smiled, a cruel expression. "Shall we scramble ties to intercept?" the voice asked. "That won't be necessary," Tarkin said into the intercom. "I believe our gunners can use the practice." He turned back to Vader. "It will be like swatting flies." Library and Archives, Death Star. Atur felt a faint vibration in the deck beneath his chair. Whatever it was, he hoped fervently that it wouldn't interfere with his work. He was almost finished with the final stage of the plan. He concentrated on programming, the monitor's flickering light painting his face with pallor. Almost there. Almost. Ah. He leaned back in satisfaction, feeling stiff back muscles protest. He had found the link in the comm system that PRC-3 had built for him, and had locked it down. A dedicated pipe for communications from the door control room. He picked up his comm link. TIE Fighter Pilot Barracks, Death Star. Vil Dance felt the vibration through his boots as he passed the watch commander. "What's up, Commander?" "That's what it feels like when the guns are locking and loading full-power charges. We got company come to call." "We scrambling?" "Negative. I guess they think we hogged all the fun last time. They're letting the gunners deal with this. Too bad." Vil's comlink chirped. "Oops, sorry, need to take that. New girlfriend is supposed to be cooking me dinner." The watch commander grinned and made a kissing sound. Vil grinned back. "I hope so," he said. He took a few steps away, pulled his comlink from his belt. "Yeah?" "Go," Wrighton's voice said. "A little under 30 minutes. "Copy. See you there." There was a short pause. "Right." Vil's mouth was suddenly dry. This was it. If he was going to change his mind, this was the time. He could still back out, stay the best pilot in the fleet, on the fast track for promotion. No. He remembered blowing up that shuttle of escaped prisoners. He remembered the nightmares he'd had for weeks afterward. He remembered the slaughter of the attacking rebel fighters. And, of course, he remembered despair and Alderaan. He didn't want to be on the side that performed such atrocities. He was going. The Hardheart Cantina, Death Star. Rachua's comm buzzed. He looked at Mima. Nobody had the number but her. And Wrighton, the archivist. She looked back at him, her lovely teal face expressionless. He answered it. "Yeah?" "Go." "I have Mima and Rodo right here." "Then I won't call them. Get to the rendezvous point." "On our way." Electronics Corridor 7B, Death Star. Nova was standing guard on a restricted corridor when his comlink cheeped. Since he was in duty black instead of whites, he was able to answer it without routing it through a helmet comm. Steele. It was the archivist. "Time to take a walk, Sergeant." "Copy." Nova left his post and started toward the turbo lifts. "What's up, Sarge?" the guard at the lifts asked. "Sudden call of nature," he said. "Those lamitos at the mess hall last night." The guard laughed. "I hear that. I'll keep an eye on your hall till you get back." "Thanks." Command Center Corridor. As Vader strode down the hall, one of his own crew officers hurriedly approached. "We count 30 rebel ships, Lord Vader, but they're so small they're avoiding our turbo lasers." Vader's burned face twisted into its unseen, stiff smile. Once again, Tarkin had been overconfident, so certain his beloved monster was proof against anything. A fly could sting you if you missed swatting it. He had his own personal wing of TIE fighters on board. He would lead them out, and they would deal with what Tarkin could not. "We'll have to destroy them ship to ship. Get the crews to their fighters." His officer knew the command referred only to Vader's elite flyers. A squadron would be more than enough. 68. Architectural Offices, Death Star. Somebody with access or clout, or both, had installed a first-rate holoprojector in the conference room that had access to external cams, and a small crowd had gathered around the images flashing across the screen. Tila walked into the room. She said to one of the drafting droids, "What's going on?" "The station is apparently under attack by rebel fighters," the droid said, "and the station's gunners seem to be having little success hitting them." She nodded. Of course. The turbo lasers were designed and timed to track larger targets. She had seen the specs. "Why haven't they scrambled TIE fighters? That's what they're for, isn't it?" The droid said. "That is beyond my capability to comment on. I do drawings, not military tactics." As she watched, a pair of the attacking fighters, both X-Wings, dived into one of the surface trenches, firing all the while. One of the architects laughed. "They're wasting their ammunition. Their guns are too small to penetrate very far into the armor." Tila frowned. That trench looked familiar. She stepped out of the conference room and moved to her office. She tapped her computer console, waved her hand over the reader, and brought up a schematic. Why would those fighters think they had a snowflake's chance in a supernova against the Death Star? If they had the plans, like she'd heard, they'd know the ship could withstand anything they could possibly fire at it without sustaining major structural damage. They could shoot themselves dry, and whatever harm they did would be repaired in a couple of shifts, as if it had never happened. Something nagged at her, tugging at the edge of her memory. Let's see. That was the trench that led to the main heat exhaust vent, wasn't it? Of course, that vent was heavily shielded by both plate and magnetics, so no fighter would be able to penetrate it. So why would they try? If they had the plans, they'd know it would be futile, wouldn't they? She blinked and looked closer. Oh. Oh. The secondary port, the unnecessary one that she'd tried to keep from being built. It was just beyond the main. Tila Cars was an architect and a good one, and she had an engineer's eye. That portal was small, only 2 meters or so. If you didn't know it was there, you'd never spot it. The ray shielding at the mouth was minimal, meant to stop stray particle beams. And even if one of those got through, it would be absorbed by the anisotropic walls of the tube before it traveled half a kilometer, so no problem there. But if something like, say, a proton torpedo were to be fired directly into it? Her comlink chirped. The sound's clarity surprised her because it wasn't coming from her pocket where she'd thought she'd put it. She felt a quick surge of panic upon the realization. What if one of her co-conspirators had tried to call? She looked about, spotted it on a shelf, grabbed it. "Yes?" It was Wrighton. He sounded very agitated. "I've been trying to reach you. Why haven't you answered?" "Sorry, I left the comlink in my office," he hissed in exasperation. "It's past time to go, Tila." "In a few minutes. I have to—" "You don't have a few minutes. You need to get to the rendezvous now." "Listen, the rebel attack. I know what they're up to." "It doesn't matter what they're up to. Go." "You don't understand. They could destroy the station." There was a short pause, no more than a couple of heartbeats. Then, "So?" Tila blinked, confused by his response. "Wrighton." "We live on a battle station called the Death Star, Tila. It's already killed billions of people, and you know it can and will do worse. Anybody who tries to stand against the Empire will feel its teeth. There's no limit to how many this abomination could slaughter." "Not all the people on board." "Don't begin to approach the numbers who were on Alderaan. Go, Tila, get off while you can. You don't want to be a part of this any further." Her emotions warred with themselves. All her work. All the dead of despair in Alderaan, and all those who might yet die. All her friends and colleagues. Civilians, prisoners. 1,000 worlds within easy reach of the Death Star. He was right. "I go now." "All right," she said. She left the images floating over her desk and hurried out into the corridor. Flight Corridor 17, Death Star. Vader strode down the hall, where he came upon a pair of his own pilots. It was time for him to take the field. These rebels were up to something. He could feel it. To the pilots, he said, "Several fighters have broken off from the main group. Come with me." His TIE fighter was fueled and ready. It was always fueled and ready, and he would personally show the rebels what happened when you went up against Darth Vader. His prototype craft was the advanced X-1, faster, better armed, and equipped with short-range hyperspace capabilities that the older models did not have. Whatever the resistance upstarts had in mind, he was going to stop it. Vader gestured, and the hatch to his fighter slid open as if by itself. He climbed into the ship, fired up the engines, and, with his two wingmates, flew through the open bay doors and into the black coldness of space. Med Center, Death Star. Yulee, having just received the comm call from Wrighton, was in his office packing a small tote with the few mementos of military life. Suddenly, the door panel opened without buzzing first. Two military security officers, uniforms starched and creased, hair severely cut and wearing implacable frowns, stepped in. "Captain Dr. Cornell Davini," one of them asked. Yulee stared at them, feeling the hope that had burned in his heart for the last few hours flare and go out. It was over. They'd been discovered. All that was left to look forward to now was a speedy military trial and then a blasting squad. He felt no fear for himself, oddly enough. What he felt was that he'd let two people down. Two women who had made a big difference in his life, Princess Leia Organa and Jedi Barriss Offee. "Yes," he said. No point in denying it. No point in denying anything anymore. "I'm Dr. Davini." The other officer said, "You are under arrest for violation of Statute OB CPO 1198, illegal medical research." "Come with us, please," the first one ordered. Yulee was too astonished to ask any questions, which was probably just as well. The two security officers marched him out of his office and down the passage toward the main conduit corridor. They fell in with the traffic flow of servicemen, civilian workers, and droids, most of whom gave Yulee and his escorts a wide berth. Yulee was relieved that his friends and co-conspirators were evidently not in the same jam that he was. They apparently still stood a chance of escaping. At least he wasn't dragging them down with him. But illegal medical research? What could he have possibly done that qualified as... And then he remembered. Sergeant Steele's midi-chlorians. He'd put up an inquiry on the MedNet weeks ago concerning them. He'd never gotten a response, and eventually, what with the workload and all, he'd forgotten about it. He remembered wondering at the time if posting the question had been a good idea. Evidently not. Polar Trench 12, Death Star. Vader said to his two wingmates, "Stay in attack formation." There were 3 Y-wings diving at the station, making for one of the trenches. Were they mad? They couldn't do any real damage, even if they deliberately plowed into the hull. But they must have something in mind. Vader switched to the command channel. "All guns in the D quadrant. Cease fire immediately." 3 Y-wings, and they'd obviously chosen some kind of target they deemed vulnerable. To his wingmates, he said, "I'll take them myself. Cover me." They acknowledged his order, but he wasn't listening. The trio fell in behind the Y-wings. It was but the work of a few seconds to lock onto the rearmost fighter. Vader thumbed his firing buttons. A hit. The ship exploded into a fireball. He flew through it. He lined up on the second fighter. He didn't even need to use the force. There was no room for the fleeing rebel pilot to maneuver. Vader fired. Another one destroyed. He lined up on the last Y-wing. Shot it. Another explosion. Too easy. Was this all they had? Upper deck corridor, Death Star. Yulee walked with his two captors along the gently curving corridor. He'd often heard it said that one's hope has been truly extinguished. Once one realizes in one's heart that the race is over. There comes with the realization a feeling of serenity, of acceptance, of peace. There's often even a sense of relief at having the terrible uncertainty that is life resolved by death's inevitability. He believed it. He'd stood at the side of too many deathbeds, watching the occupants' final moments, to think otherwise. It wasn't the way everyone died, of course, but of those who passed away, at least semi-conscious and reasonably in possession of their faculties, a surprising number reported moments before breathing their last that they had entered this state of grace. Not Yulee. He wasn't on his deathbed, but he certainly had reason to believe that his life had just ended. Maybe his value as a surgeon could save him, but he doubted it. His only chance at finally getting out of this lifelong insanity that was war had been snatched from him at the 11th hour. Maybe it was because he was still in shock from the unexpected dashing of his escape plan. But what he was feeling certainly wasn't serenity. It was anger. His life had gone wrong the moment he'd set foot on the pestilent dirt of Drongar 2 decades earlier, although he hadn't realized it at the time. His plan had been to do his tour and rotate out, then start in private practice. Big Zoo on Alderaan had been his first choice. He'd seen himself at this age mostly retired, save for the occasional consulting job with a wife and kids. Instead, his life had been one long series of bush assignments, frontline care, Republic and Imperial mobile surgical units, and other work, most of it dangerous, wearisome, and thankless. And now, just when it looked like he might finally have the opportunity at last to change it, to be hoisted by an earlier attempt to do his job responsibly and morally, well, there was much to be said for it if one was a fan of irony. He might as well accept it. If such a thing as destiny existed, then his was obviously to be a military surgeon for the rest of his life, assuming said life wasn't cut short by blaster fire in the very near future. Perhaps it was only in resignation, in bowing to the inevitable, that he would find peace. Because it would take a miracle to rescue him now. The sound of a muffled explosion, more felt than heard, rumbled around them. Several passers-by reacted nervously. "What was that?" Yulee asked. At first, he thought he wasn't going to receive an answer, but then one of the officers said, "Rebel fighters bombing the surface is my guess. Or going splat on it," the other suggested. This brought grim chuckles from both. Yulee found the humor a little hard to appreciate. "All the good it'll do him," the first officer said. "Lord Vader's out there with his elites. Those rebel scum are dead men flying." "Let's take a lift down to 3A," his partner suggested. "We can cut through hydroponics and—" The wall exploded. Later, Yulee realized that it had to have been another bomb or crash on the surface just above them. At the time, all he knew was that several nearby panels had erupted in a shower of sparks and shrapnel, causing panic among the nearby people. And in the smoke and general confusion, Yulee found himself separated from his captors. There were many different deities worshipped on many different worlds, all supposedly capable of miracles. Yulee had no idea which of them, if any, might have been responsible for this one. But he wasn't taking the time to question it, that was for sure. "Better let them know I'm coming," he thought. He pulled his comlink from a pocket as he ran through the panicked crowd, fumbled it, and saw it vanish into the stampeding chaos. According to his chrono, he had less than 15 minutes to reach the rendezvous point. No time to even think about looking for the comlink. He ran faster. 69. Storage room 3181 Death Star. Tila tapped the access code into the pad next to the door, which slid up to reveal the others, all dressed in medical transport grays. She wondered briefly how they'd ever found a size big enough for Rodo, and then Vil practically knocked her over when he hugged her. "Where have you been? I was worried sick. Get changed, hurry." The room had no other compartments, and this was hardly the time for modesty anyway. Tila stripped and quickly donned a set of pale gray coveralls. There were medical insignia on the sleeves and breast. As she dressed, she looked at the others, doing a head count. Vil, Mima, Rachua, Rodo, Nova. "We're like 2 people," she said. "We've noticed," Rachua said. "We haven't heard from either the doc or the old man." Tila pulled her comlink and was about to input Yulee's code when the room's access panel whooshed up again. Yulie, red-faced and breathing hard, entered.
Cutting it kind of close, aren't we, Doc?
Nova asked. Yulie gave him a strange look, almost as if he blamed the Sarge for his tardiness. But all he said was, "I've got to listen to the advice I give my patients, and exercise." Tila's comlink cheeped. She thumbed it. "Rightin'. You made it to the rendezvous. I'm getting dressed now. The others? They're all here, except for you. Good, good. You have less than 10 minutes to get from there to the ship. Where are you?" A slight hesitation. "In my office." "What?" Tila looked about, saw that the others were as shocked as she was. "But you can't—" "I'm afraid there has been a glitch in the plan," Wrighton's voice said. "My faithful droid was a bit clumsy in its research, and as a result, it won't be able to fulfill its part. Somebody has to be here to vet the call from the man who will open the door for you. That would be me." "Can't you take the call on your comlink?" "Alas, no. My droid set it up, and I'm not technically skilled enough with hard and firmware to jigger what it did. It doesn't matter. I did a check on that possibility you brought up, and I think you're right, Tila. If that happens, no one will be coming for me. If it doesn't happen, well, I've had a long and enjoyable ride. No regrets." "A tour?" No, not now. You don't have time. Get moving. Have a good life, child. Now go, all of you." He shut off the link from his end. Nobody moved or spoke for a few seconds. "Can't we go back for him?" Tila asked, fighting back tears. She knew the answer, of course, even before Mima said, "There's no time. All we can do is make sure his sacrifice isn't in vain."
She's right,
Rodo said.
"Let's go."
Vil opened the door, and they moved into the corridor. "I really hope somebody knows where we're going," Ratchua said. "This way," Nova said. "The entrance to the dock staging area is just around the next corner." He took the lead. The corridor widened out, ending in a blast door guarded by a pair of stormtroopers in black uniforms. Nova stepped up to one of them. "We've got an emergency medical flight." "Your orders?" the trooper said.
"Come on, Sarge, we're in a hurry. We got guys dying out there. And if I let you in without scanning your orders, I'm going to be dying in here."
The fake orders were logged into the shuttle's computer. They didn't have any kind of flimsy or data chip on them. Nova said,
"They didn't give us anything. The orders are on the ship."
"Fine, I'll have somebody download and check them." Tila saw Nova glance at his chrono, then look at her. They had less than 10 minutes before that tractor beam would be shut off, and it was only going to be offline for 45 seconds. They couldn't wait. Something had to be done. Now. Corridor outside Medical Bay, Death Star. Nova knew they were out of time. There was only one course left open to them. He glanced at the other guard, then at Rodo, and knew, by that kind of telepathy fighters can sometimes share, that the big man understood. Nova turned back to the guard and shrugged.
"Okay, you're in charge. Let me get you the comlink code."
And with that he fired a punch into the guard's throat, flipped the man's helmet up with his free hand, then snapped an elbow to the now bare temple. The guard dropped. He saw the second guard fall as Rodo swept his feet from under him, then followed him down to the deck to bounce the guard's head against the plate. Excellent. Both taken out with a minimum of fuss.
"Let's go, people."
Nova opened the blast doors. Just as 3 squads of black-suited guards came around the corner. 15 men in all. 15 armed men. The lieutenant in charge saw his 2 fallen comrades. "Hey, what the—" Nova said. "These men have been poisoned. We were called to take care of them and contain the area." That wouldn't work for long, he knew. 7 medics dispatched for just 2 guards? The lieutenant would have to be pretty challenged to buy that for more than a few seconds. Nova looked at Rodo again. "What do you say, Rodo?" Rodo nodded. He looked at the others, particularly at Mima.
"Go,"
he said softly. Mima stared at him, shocked. "Rodo. No." Nova looked at Dance, jerked his thumb at the blast doors. "You're the only one who can do it, Flyboy. Go." There was a long moment that seemed to stretch to infinity, and then the others started to move. The lieutenant said, "Hold up there, let me see your authorization." He approached, and his men followed. Nova held up a hand. "You'll need respirators," he said. "These two were gassed, nerve toxin. Better not get too close. I've got some antitoxin ampules here, if you let me inoculate you and your men." The guards were only a few meters away now. They showed no concern about any possible proximity to nerve gas. "You going to take the right side?" Rodo said out of the corner of his mouth. "Yeah, watch that little guy on the left. He's already got his hand on his blaster." "Copy. Nice knowing you, Nova." "You too, Rodo." 70. Corridor outside Medical Bay, Death Star. Ratchua saw the action begin, as if the participants were moving in slow motion. He was no fighter, but as the guards and Steele and Rodo tangled, he saw one of the guards draw a blaster, and he knew his old jailer and the bouncer wouldn't be able to stop the man in time. But Salat Ratchua Dill might. He moved as fast as he had ever moved in his life. The blaster came up, and the guard extended his arm. Ratchua could see the man's finger begin to tighten, slowly, slowly. Ratchua slammed into him. There was no skill involved. It was just a body block, but his speed magnified the force with which he struck the trooper, enough to knock the latter into the corridor's far wall. The blaster clattered to the floor, followed by the unconscious trooper. Ratchua was momentarily stunned himself, the impact having hit him just as hard, of course, but he'd been prepared for it. He reeled, but managed to stay on his feet until his head cleared. The world resumed its normal speed. He saw other troopers going for their blasters, but Steele and Rodo were among them now, too close for the guards to shoot without risking hits on their own people. Time to leave. Mima, Vil, Tila, and Doc Davini were just inside the doors. Ratchua moved to join them, kicking in the afterburner again. He slapped the hatch control as he blurred by it. The blast doors closed behind him and locked. The bay was a small one, used primarily for berthing and launching medical vessels. And there was their ticket to freedom, the E2T shuttle, sitting on the landing turntable. As they approached, another officer came down the ramp. He eyed them suspiciously. Ratchua was convinced that there was a certain rank of Imperial officers whose only job was to eye everything suspiciously. The officer, a sergeant major, said, "What do you people want here?" Yulee stepped up. "I'm Dr. Davini," he said. "This is my team. We have a medical emergency we need to get to stat. That's our ship. Your orders? They're in the ship's computer. I'll transmit them from there once we've launched." "Protocol." Yulee stepped up close to the officer. "Shut it, man," he said in a low voice. "Do you want to be responsible for the death of Admiral Dela?" The officer's eyes went wide. "Admiral Dela? Her ship has been hit by rebel fire, and we're detailed to collect her. You sure you want to be the man who held us up?" The officer stepped aside. "Let's go, people," Yulee said. "We've got a job to do." They moved quickly up the ramp into the shuttle, Ratchua thinking, "The doc's a pretty good con man. Who knew?" Nova ducked a wild swing, caught the attacking guard's arm, and spun him into the trooper behind him. Both men fell, but he had no time to rejoice because there were others coming for him. Lots of others. He waded into a pair of guards and hit both at the same instant with a double punch, smashing their noses, then dropped and swept, upending another one, and before that one hit the deck, he was up again, firing a sidekick into the belly of yet another. Beside him, Rodo grabbed a guard by his front, lifted him off his feet, and headbutted the man, knocking his helmet off, then threw him into another trooper. He whirled and took out two more with a spin kick. "We're having fun now, aren't we?" the big man said. He laughed. Nova recognized his recurring nightmare, which had now become reality. He didn't know the how or the why of it. He only knew that they were going to lose. Well then, that was how it would be. They'd taken out a goodly number of guards, but there were still 7 or 8 of them standing, and the only reason he and Rodo hadn't been roasted yet was because the fighting had been too close for the guards to use their blasters. That was about to change, however. They were backing away, going for their weapons. The game would soon be over. Nova felt fear welling inside him. Not for himself. He knew he was a dead man fighting. 2 against 15, the latter armed with blasters. A win was never in those cards. But it was vitally important that he prolong the fight as long as he could, to give the others time to escape. This would be his last dance, and he wanted it to be the best he could manage. Going up against impossible odds, going down swinging, using what he knew. There were a lot worse ways to check out. Beside him, Rodo grabbed a guard's head in both massive hands and twisted. The guard dropped, his neck broken. But another trooper had come up behind the big man, and now he thrust his blaster into Rodo's back. Nova saw Rodo's midsection turn black and charred as the energy beam burned its way through, saw Rodo's look of shock as he fell. He saw another trooper drawing down on him, saw the blaster's muzzle aimed at his head, and knew he could never reach it in time. The world turned white hot like the center of a star, and then icy black, colder than space. 71. E2T Med Shuttle 5537. Dance dropped into the pilot's seat and fired up the central processor. The heads-up display appeared. "Sublight drive up," he reported. "Now if someone will just open the door." It took only a couple of seconds for door control to query over the comm. "E2T Medical Shuttle 5537, why are you powering up?" Dance looked at Yulie. Yulie activated the comm. "This is Dr. Cornell Davini, op number 504-614-575. We have an emergency pickup." "Transmit your orders, Doctor." Yulie looked at Dance. "Do it, Vil." Dance sent the file. Library and Archives, Death Star. The hardwired comm line lit. Auteur picked up the headset. "Flight control," he said. "Flight control? The comm station must have given me the wrong connection. Sorry." Auteur blinked. "Who are you trying to contact?" "The library. This is Lieutenant Escher. We just had a droid we were examining to a firmware meltdown, and we need to talk to its supervisor." "Sorry, I can't help you, Lieutenant. We're kind of busy here." "Right. Out." Auteur broke the connection and began to sweat. This was bad. They'd recheck the number and call again. If he didn't answer, and he had to answer in case it was bay door control, they'd know something was wrong, and they'd be sending somebody to have a little talk with him right away. Droids that suddenly went blank were rare enough that they'd suspect tampering. Add that to a comm number that was misconnected more than once, and even an Imperial officer could do the math. How much time did he have? Minutes, if he was lucky. Seconds, more likely. The comm lit again. Auteur activated it. "Flight control." "Flight control, this is bay door control 57541. We have orders for departure of an E2T Med Shuttle." Auteur tried to sound bored. "Order number." The tech read off the code. Auteur counted slowly to 3. "Ah, yeah, here it is. That's a valid number, Control. Let him go." "Copy that, Flight Control." Auteur shut down the comm and leaned back in his chair. Now, if PRC-3's programming continued to work, the ship would be away in a moment or two, and if anybody tried to stop it with the rigged tractor beam, which they might because tractor beam control wouldn't have a copy of the ship's order in its computer any more than the real flight control did, then, in theory, the beam wouldn't work, and they should fly free. In theory. In any event, there was nothing else he could do now. He rose and stepped away from his desk. If Tila Karz's evaluation of the danger was correct, and if the rebels could read the plans well enough to spot the design flaw, both entirely reasonable assumptions, then the Death Star might have only a few minutes more of existence left to it. If that indeed proved to be the case, he knew where he wanted to spend those last few minutes. Auteur walked into the stacks until he was surrounded by shelves of various data storage. Tapes, chips, disks, even books. As always, it comforted him to be encompassed by knowledge. He sat down on a bench. A pity he would never write that book. The destruction of the Death Star would have made a powerful final chapter. Ah, well, perhaps someone else would put stylus to screen someday and tell the tale. Auteur smiled. He took a deep breath of the musty air. He was content. Command Center Control Room, Death Star. Tarkin stood watching the planet-moon graphic as the orbit around the world came closer to being complete. Vader had taken out his elite TIE squad and knocked off several of the rebels, though that hadn't been necessary. They couldn't hurt this station. Nothing could. An operations lieutenant approached. Tarkin looked at him. The man was obviously worried. He said, "We've analyzed their attack, sir, and there is a danger." Danger? Impossible. Should I have your ship standing by? Tarkin stared at the man. Evacuate. In our moment of triumph? I think you overestimate their chances. He turned back to watch the graphic. Cut and run just as they were about to wipe out the head base of the rebellion? Preposterous. The voice from the speaker said, "Rebel base, 3 minutes and closing." What harm could those last few fighters possibly do in that time? In less than 3 minutes, they would be orphans, easy pickings, and the war would effectively be won. Super Laser Fire Control, Death Star. Ten Granite watched the graphic on his screen. The target would be within range in another couple of minutes. His mouth was as dry as desert sand, his belly churning like a heavy sea. He couldn't do this. He couldn't murder yet another world. But he couldn't stop it either. Were he to stand down, another gunner would be up here to replace him in mere minutes, and he would be in the brig with a military death mark against him. What was he going to do? E-2T Med Shuttle 5537, Yavin System, Gordian Reach. The bay doors opened, and Vil punched it. The little ship rocketed out. Now all he had to do was stay in the groove. E-2T Medical Shuttle 5537, this is Flight Control. Where are you going? Vil said, "Flight Control, this is Lieutenant Fake Nom. We have an emergency pickup? I show no record of your flight plan." Stall, Vil. "Hey, that's not my problem. I just fly where I'm told. Check with door control, they vetted us." "We are attempting to do that now, Lieutenant. Turn it around and return to the dock until we get it cleared up." "Negative on that, Flight Control. This is a priority mission. We come back, it'll be too late to do our job." The flight control officer was between a rock and a hard place, Vil knew. He had his protocols, and they weren't being met. But somebody had opened the doors and let the shuttle leave, so maybe it was a computer error. It wouldn't be the first one. "This is TIE X-1, came a deep voice over the comm. "What is the nature of your mission, shuttle?" Vil felt his insides freeze. Any starfighter pilot who knew a tractor from a presser knew that designation. It was Vader himself on the comm. Vil said, "An incoming Imperial ship has been damaged by rebel fire. They have wounded." "I know of no such Imperial arrivals," Vader said. "Return to the station." "Copy, Lord Vader. We are returning to the station." He shut off the comm. Ratchua said, "What? Are you crazy?" "Relax," Vil said. "We aren't going back. But if he thinks we are, that buys us a few more seconds to get clear. We're faster than he is once we get moving. He won't be able to—" "Uh-oh." "What?" That from Tila. "He's coming at us." TIE X-1. The instant he had seen that medical conveyance, Vader had felt something wrong, a clamor from the dark side. While he ordered the shuttle back to the station, all it took was a moment's probing with the Force for him to recognize a mind that was familiar. There were several aboard, none of them weak-minded, but one. A woman. Where had he felt her before? Ah, he had it. On the station, when he had toured during construction. One of the builders, an architect, had shut him out of her thoughts, as if slamming a door in his face. He'd been impressed by her strength of mind and will. What was an architect doing on a medical rescue ship? And then he knew. Deserters. His anger surged. There were so many things about this project that he had not been able to control. Well, he could deal with this. The X-Wings could wait a moment or two longer. He would take care of these traitors himself. They would learn that resisting Darth Vader was fatal. As he and his wingmates bore in, the medical ship slewed into a tight high-G turn. Vader felt the fabric of the Force shiver as he adjusted his path to intercept. He opened the channel again. "Return to the station, shuttle, or I will fire on you," he said. E-2T Med Shuttle 5537. They were in deep trouble, Vil knew. They weren't even armed, and Darth Vader was the best fighter pilot in the galaxy. He remembered saying something once to the effect that he would probably just auger his ship in if he ever found himself in Vader's crosshairs. That way at least he got to choose when to die. It wasn't just his life on the line now, though. Desperate, Vil ran every trick he could think of through his mind. None of them was going to do the job. They were cooked. Unless... TIE X-1. Vader bored in. The targeting computer narrowed the scan. He had a lock. Whatever they were up to, spies, perhaps, it didn't matter. He would eliminate them, then return to the main task. He thumbed the fire buttons. 72. E2T Med Shuttle 5537. Vil slapped the retrofire controls. The reverse thrusters all lit, full out. The ambulance didn't stop, but it slowed enough so that Vader and his two wingmates blew past as if the larger craft were standing still. Vil punched the sublights back up to full and angled to starboard. No tricks now, just a straight run, a sprint. TIE X-1. Vader was angry with himself. They'd used such an obvious and simple avoidance ploy that he hadn't seen it coming, even through the Force. He toggled the comm channel. "Get a tractor beam on that med shuttle." The reply crackled through his headphones. "I'm sorry, Lord Vader, but the beam generator for that sector has tripped its breakers. We'll have it back online momentarily." Blast. Vader swung around to follow the fleeing ship. "Lord Vader," came the voice of one of his TIE pilots. "What is it?" "Another trio of X-Wing fighters is making a run up the same trench." Vader reached out with the dark side, seeking, and immediately sensed a presence in whom the Force was powerful as it would be in a Jedi Knight. Vader realized immediately that this was by far the greater problem. "Break off," he ordered his wingmates. "Back to the station to intercept the new attackers." "What about the med shuttle?" "Let it go. It's not important." Vader led his pilots back toward the station. They arrowed down into the trench, their fighters screaming between the high walls. There were the three X-Wings. Vader and his wingmates followed, blasting them one by one. Again, no real effort was necessary. Were they all suicidal? But he realized none of them was carrying the pilot with whom the Force had been riding. That one was still out there somewhere. Vader knew he had to find that one. He was a danger. Perhaps the only real danger. "I need locations on the remaining rebel fighters," he said. "At once, Lord Vader." There was a short pause. "There are only 3 more, my lord, and they have just entered the same trench," Vader finished. Whatever the target, the rebels were convinced it was worth every ship they had. He knew he had best finish the last 3 quickly. E2T Med Shuttle 5537. Vil didn't know why Vader had broken off the pursuit, but he wasn't complaining. He tried to coax a little more juice out of the sublight engines. The encounter with Vader had lost them precious time. They still had to make it out of tractor beam range before... He felt the ship lurch, even as Ratua asked, "Why are we slowing down?" Vil shoved the feeder slide control to maximum, but the shuttle continued to slow. He said, "They've got the tractor beam working again." "Can we break free?" Yuli asked. "I don't know. We should be right at the limits of its range. I'm locking in the auxiliary power." He dialed up the rheostat, suiting action to words. The E2T surged, then slowed again. "Vil," Tila said. "We're still moving in the right direction," he said. "There's still a..." The ambulance ship started to shudder, then after a few more seconds it stopped. Then it began to move backward. "Frag," Vil said, his voice quiet. "They got us." The engines strained, but there was a definite increased speed sternward. The drive power dials started to move into the overload zones. "The engines will blow if I don't shut them down," Vil said. "Let them," Tila said. "Better to die trying than to let them capture and execute us. We owe Atur, Nova, and Rodo that much." Vil looked around. The others all nodded. He reached for Tila's hand, held it. 73. Command Center Control Room, Death Star. The officer said, "Less than a minute, sir." Tarkin nodded. Seconds away from glory. At last, after the years of scheming, of work, now he would show them all. TIE X-1 Meridian Trench. Vader and his 2 wingmates flew the trench, the last 3 X-wings dead ahead. His wingmate fired, hit one of the rebels. The wounded ship pulled up out of the fight. "Let him go," Vader commanded. "Stay on the leader." One of the ships hung back, obviously trying to delay Vader and his pilots. He focused on it, lined up, fired. The ship exploded. 1 left. Vader moved to engage him. "I'm on the leader," he announced. The TIE X-1 screamed down the length of the trench, hot on the X-wing's tail. Closer, almost there. Vader felt energy coming from the pilot in almost palpable waves. "The Force is strong in this one," he said, more to himself than his wingmates. Strong, but not strong enough to stop Vader, not strong enough to prevent the man who killed Obi-Wan Kenobi from doing what had to be done. Vader triggered his guns. He hit the fighter's R2 unit, saw the smoke and flames erupt from the hit. Good. Now, he thought, we finish this. Command Center Control Room, Death Star. "Rebel base is in range," the voice from the comm said. Elated, Tarkin turned to Mati. He kept his voice calm. "You may fire when ready." TIE X-1 Meridian Trench. Slowly, Vader crept up on the last X-wing. The Force swirled about the mysterious pilot. Eddies, clouds, a vortex of powerful energy. Who could this be? This was no Jedi, of that Vader was certain, but he was steeped in the Force like one. The target danced back and forth across his screen. Then, finally, a lock. "I have you now," Vader murmured. He moved to thumb the firing buttons. Then, suddenly, his starboard wingmate's TIE exploded. "What?" Vader twisted about, trying to see through the cockpit's transparasteel while simultaneously reaching out with the Force. Enemy fire was coming in from a totally unexpected direction. But how? There weren't any more enemy fighters in the vicinity. Then he felt the attacker, approaching from above to the port side. Vader couldn't see it, but his remaining wingmate could. He screamed, "Look out!" The port wingmate's TIE collided with Vader's ship and was knocked spinning out of control. The X-1 ricocheted off the wingmate, sending the latter to a fiery doom against a trench wall. Vader's ship was hurled out of the trench and sent pitching and yawing into an uncontrollable series of flips. At one point, he caught a blurred glimpse of the unexpected attacker. He couldn't be sure, but it looked like the battered old Corellian freighter he'd investigated earlier, which had escaped just after his duel with Obi-Wan. No time to wonder about that now. Vader fought to stabilize his craft, but the control surfaces were damaged. He had to use his drive pulses. His TIE continued to spin, however, and he realized he was an easy target. He managed to get the spin under control and then ready the little ship for the jump to light speed. A second or two would be enough. A couple of light seconds would put him more than 500,000 kilometers away and give him a chance to get the TIE under control. But, he realized grimly, whatever that pilot who was one with the Force planned to shoot, he was now going to have a chance to hit it. 74. Super laser fire control, Death Star. Ten heard the order as if he were at the bottom of a deep mine shaft. It echoed over him. "Commence primary ignition." His crew threw switches, adjusted rheostats, pushed buttons. The status reports came in one by one, like pronouncements of doom. All too soon, it was down to him. Slowly, Ten lifted the incredible tonnage of his right arm. His hand trembled on the lever. He saw his CO watching him through the smoked lens of the blast helmet. He could read the man's mind. "Shoot, Chief. Shoot." Ten wasn't a believer in anything more than he could see and hear and touch. Never had been. But now he prayed for a miracle, for something, anything, to deliver him from the burden of so many more deaths, for something to stop it somehow. With his free hand, he activated the comm. "Stand by," he said, hardly knowing why he was saying it, seeking only to delay the inevitable as long as possible. "Stand by." Command Center Control Room, Death Star. Motti yelled in the background. "They fired proton torpedoes down an auxiliary heat shaft. Incoming! Incoming! The reactor will blow!" Tarkin blinked. No. No, it wouldn't. He was calm. All would be well. This station was invulnerable. It was unbeatable. It was unthinkable that it could be beaten. Unthinkable. E2T Med Shuttle 5537. The shuttle suddenly leapt forward, as if kicked by a giant's boot. The inertial dampeners kept them from being whiplashed, but they could see the starfield shift crazily about them. "What the?" Rachua began. He stopped as he and the rest of them stared. The rear viewer was focused on the Death Star, which had exploded in a silent, horrendous flare of red and orange and yellow. A hyperspatial reflux ring expanded outward. "What?" Mima was shaking her head in disbelief. "It blew up," Yulie said. He sounded stunned. "The Death Star just blew up." "Everybody hang on," Vil said. "The edge of the shock wave will hit us pretty fast." The ship jumped, shook suddenly, then began to tumble, a leaf in a gale. "Kark," Vil said, fighting to regain control of the ambulance. "I hope she doesn't break up." The tumble continued. There was a bad moment, another worse one, and then the battering stopped. "What happened?" Tila asked. "Shockwave passed us. We're still in one piece." Vil engaged the sublights. "Now, if we can just stay ahead of the shrapnel, we should be okay." "Remind me to find out who made this ambulance," Rachua said. "I want to send them a testimonial, and if they make flitters, I want to buy one." The others laughed, the relieved laughter of those narrowly delivered from death. All except Tila. "Tila," Vil said, "you okay?" "Yeah. It's just that the Death Star was a monster, no question about that. It was conceived by monsters and controlled by them. But not everyone on board was a monster." Nobody said anything for a while. "How did it happen?" Rachua asked. "Was it the Alliance, or did someone just push the wrong button?" "We'll never know," Mima said. "The super laser must have misfired. That's the only explanation that makes any sense," Vil replied. "It couldn't have been anything the rebels threw at it. Those X-Wings were like buzz beetles trying to take down a Ronto." "Don't be too sure," Tila said. She quickly explained about the unshielded vent. Vil looked skeptical. "I'm not buying it. Even with the targeting computer, the chances of lobbing a proton torpedo down that shaft were 1,000,000 to 1. Tila smiled. "What was it you told me once? Sometimes long odds are the only ones worth playing." There was another short silence. "So what now?" Yulie asked. He was tired, and he could see that the others were too. They were all in fairly heavy shock, watching two planets, or one planet and one battle station the size of a moon, blow up within the span of a cycle was just too much for the mind to encompass. "We have pretty good star charts," Vil said, "and a decent cruising range. We can get to any of half a dozen systems. But there's a rebel base on that moon right over there, and I'd guess they're pretty happy right now. Might be room for a few people willing to sign up." "You'd do that?" Mima asked. "Join the rebellion?" Vil shrugged. "I'm a fighter pilot. It's what I do, and I'm good at it. More to the point, I'm a fighter pilot who's extremely disillusioned with the side I've been on. In addition to my piloting skills, I can take a tie apart blindfolded and put it back together. I know a few secrets our new friends might be interested in." "Not to mention," Mima said, "you're the man who outflew Darth Vader." Vil grinned, then looked at Tila. "Of course, it depends on your plans." "It does? Why might that be?" Vil looked like he'd just swallowed a cup of too hot calf.
Well, he said, if you're agreeable, I thought we might get married. Interesting way to propose, flyboy, she said. I'll think about it. But she grinned. Then her expression turned serious. They'll need planners and designers, too, she said. And I wouldn't be a prisoner, but a free woman. There are a lot of political prisoners still under the Empire's hand. I'd like to help them. Mima said, not a bad idea. Maybe I'll tag along, try to find another cantina to run. Girls got to eat, after all, and I'm guessing the rebels don't mind lifting a glass now and then. I wouldn't worry about having to work if I were you, Ratchua said to her. No offense, Green Eyes, but as much fun as you are, I don't want to be a smuggler's woman. I'm done with the adventurous life for a while. Well, I was thinking of getting out of the smuggling business, he said, into legal ventures. Uh-huh, Ratchua grinned. Probably should have mentioned that my family is, well fixed. I think they'd like to meet you. They always hoped I'd find a good woman and settle down, get into the family business. Which is? They manage real estate, own a few properties here and there, places like the Netaluma Tower on Imperial Center. Coruscant, Yulie corrected him. He realized it was a measure of just how tired he was that Ratchua's admission of wealth was hardly even surprising. My mistake. Anyway, my share of that alone would mean you wouldn't have to work if you didn't want to. Your share? And how much would that be? Well, he hesitated. Speak or I'll twist your head off. 500 million credits, give or take a couple of million. She stared at him. What? You're rich? Why'd you become a smuggler? Ratchua shrugged. I thought property management was boring. I was young and rebellious, and I wanted to do something more interesting. But I'm thinking maybe I've had enough excitement for one lifetime. I'm going to kill you, Mima said. No, maybe I'll wait until after I meet your family. They'll probably want to help. Tila looked at Yulie. What about you, Doc? What indeed? Yulie opened his mouth, fully intending to tell them that he planned to head for the farthest stars, to find a world somewhere way out in the reach, and open up a practice there, someplace where neither the Empire nor the Alliance was known. He'd been working in unwilling servitude for just about all of his adult life, after all. Freedom, the ability to choose where he wanted to work, for how long, and for whom, if anyone, was a powerful lure. But what he heard himself say was, I'm with Vil. If the rebellion will have me, I'll throw in my lot with theirs. I'm a pretty good battle surgeon. At least I've had a lot of practice. And the Empire has to be stopped. Somebody made a pretty good start on that today, Mima said. So, Vil said, since we're all in agreement, let's go see how the other half lives, shall we? 75. TIE X-1, Interplanetary Space, Yavin System. Darth Vader had been safely out of danger when the Death Star had blown up. His ship was damaged, but still space-worthy enough that, with a couple of careful jumps, he could reach a hidden Imperial naval base a few light-years away. Despite the direness of the situation, he couldn't help another painful smile. The Death Star, with all its troops and weapons, the super laser that could by itself destroy entire planets, trillions of credits worth of labor and material, all of it was gone to incandescent dust in an instant. He didn't know exactly how it had happened, but he knew it had something to do with the pilot of that tiny, insignificant X-Wing. Somehow, he alone had taken out the battle station. Vader didn't need the dark side to tell him that, or that the pilot had survived the explosion. One man had done what a fleet could not have managed. The Force was indeed strong in this one. Who was he? Not a Jedi, Vader was certain. He had felt no sense of the control that a Jedi would possess. In the final analysis, however, it really didn't matter. Be the mysterious stranger a Jedi or not, Vader knew that he and this other, who was so permeated with the Force, would meet again. It was inevitable.
He checked his position and readied his small ship for the next insertion into hyperspace. He knew he would have to make his report to the Emperor immediately, even though he was certain that the Dark Lord of the Sith was already aware of what had happened to his pet project. He was not looking forward to the meeting. As he made the jump to light speed and beyond, Darth Vader was certain of one thing. His master would not be pleased. This audiobook was developed 100% using artificial intelligence to generate realistic and familiar voices,